How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is What If Deku Had a Question Quirk, the movie. Before I start this movie off, however, I would like to ask you all to go subscribe to my new gaming channel, a link in the description to that. Sit back, relax, and enjoy, and now, let's begin. Izuku Midoriya. What a lovely name, Mrs. Midoriya. Inko would smile before thanking the doctor. We start this what if off with a very happy, bright young boy, as this, of course, would be Izuku Midoriya. He would grow up having a very, very happy childhood, as both of his parents made sure to spend as much time as they possibly could with him. However, it wasn't really as much time as they could have, as both of them were doctors and they couldn't really spend as much time as they really wanted to with their own son. This caused Izuku to spend a lot of time with random babysitters throughout the years. However, since Izuku just didn't see his parents much, they would always give him gifts. However, every time Izuku would see his parents, which was every night for dinner, they would try to get home for dinner and spend the rest of the night with Izuku. So throughout the day when Izuku was at school and he'd come home, he'd probably not see his parents for hours. So he'd be put to bed by his parents and not see them for basically another 24 hours. However, every time they saw him, they would instill it in Izuku's mind to have good morals, not to become arrogant, egotistical. Izuku, wanting to make his parents proud, would make sure of it that these morals were embedded into his mind, and so that he never became just someone that people would hate, but rather someone people loved and would become friends with super easily. And so, with that, Izuku would end up going to school one day to see all the kids surrounded by Bakugo Katsuki. It was a young boy with around blonde-looking hair. Izuku was kind of confused why everyone was there. However, as soon as Izuku walked into the crowd to look upon what they were all staring at, Izuku's eyes would light up as he would see the glow and just magnificent pops of what Bakugo Katsuki's quirk had been. It had just been activated. It was an explosion-looking quirk. However, many of them, still being quite young, had no clue what an explosion was. The teachers would be marveling at Bakugo's quirk, telling him how cool it must be to have such an extravagant-looking quirk, and it looked so amazing, as one of them would call his parents to come take him to the quirk doctor's office. As their parents would slowly roll up, everyone would follow Bakugo as he would walk out, just smirking to himself. Yup, I'm gonna make sure I become the #1 hero. I'm even gonna surpass All Might. Many of the kids would even admire Bakugo, just staring on, seeing how proud and confident he looked with his amazing-looking quirk. As weeks would end up passing, many of them would end up getting their own quirks. However, many of them would be disappointed, not having the same satisfactory just glow and amazement that Bakugo's quirk had given them just by staring at it. As the couple weeks would end up passing, Izuku would end up being left not having a quirk being activated just yet. Many of the students would start to wonder and ask Izuku questions. Hey, Izuku, has your quirk activated yet? Have you gotten your quirk yet? Izuku would just shake his head, as he would then just sigh. I don't know. I mean, I haven't gotten a quirk just yet. My mom said I'll get one very soon, though, Izuku would say to his friends, as they would all just nod their head. That night, Izuku would end up just being picked up by his mother, as she would end up telling Izuku that they need to get him into some fancy clothing. Izuku was confused. This was the first time they had ever been, in fancy clothing, at least at Izuku's house. As Izuku would be dressed by his mother, they would all of a sudden just be walking out to the door. Izuku had heard a strange bell-ing sound that he had heard and familiarized it with babysitters coming over. As this would happen, Inko would open the door, as it would reveal just two people with a young daughter standing next to them, as Inko would then introduce them to Izuku. Oh, Izuku, this is so-and-so, and this is their daughter, Lisa. They just recently moved here from Europe, she would say, as Izuku's father had actually met them on a business trip over in Europe, and they had actually recently decided to move over towards Japan, where Izuku lived, for the business opportunities that it had. And so, with that, Izuku Izuku would end up being told to take Lisa up to his room to just show her all of his toys and all of that and just to go play. As this would end up happening, Izuku would walk up to his room as he would end up greeting Lisa just the way his mother had told him to, putting out his hand, just saying, "Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya," as Lisa would do the same, shaking his hand, saying that her name was Lisa. Izuku would see this as they would then start to play with all of the miscellaneous toys and just trucks, trains, all of the random toys that Izuku had scattered across his room floor. As the night would end up coming to an end, both of them would end up being eating dinner at the kids' table, as they would end up having to end up leaving after a couple of hours. Izuku would bid his new best friend just a goodbye, as he would wave goodbye to her, as then Izuku would ask just his mother, Inko, when the next time he will see Lisa was. He had had a blast playing with her with all of the toys, as they had become quite good friends. Inko would then smile before telling Izuku that she's moving into his school, and so that he should see her actually tomorrow. And sure enough, tomorrow came as Izuku would come into school, where he would see Lisa nervously sitting in the corner, as she had no clue who anyone was. As Izuku would rush up to her, waving, saying, "Oh, hi, Lisa," and appear so we meet again, as Lisa would then sort of just awkwardly laugh. "Hey, Lisa, I didn't get an opportunity to ask you, what's your quirk?" "Oh, my quirk is a healing quirk," as Izuku would nod his head before asking in confusion, "Oh, what do you mean?" Lisa would then point down to a scrape on Izuku's knee that had been scabbed over. Izuku had fallen on the playground just about a week prior, as it was in the middle of its healing process. She would put her hands down above the scab as her hands would start to glow. As all of a sudden, the scab would just disappear and Izuku's knee was good as new. Izuku would marvel in amazement along with many of the other students that had arrived early to the preschool. "Whoa, that's insane! You can heal us? Wait, can you heal me? I got cut here," as many of them would just marvel at how Lisa was able to do this so easily without a sweat. It looked crazy. It possibly even rivaled Bakugo Katsuki's quirk. However, as soon as Bakugo arrived and he saw all the attention that Lisa was just being given, he would end up starting to become jealous. How dare she take the spotlight away from him? This new girl's gonna have to pay. And sure enough, later that day, Bakugo Katsuki would be sitting out on the playground on the swings, waiting for Lisa to end up walking by, as she would end up having to get onto a bus back to her house. However, as she was walking by, Bakugo would grab her wrist, pulling it tightly before yanking her behind a brick wall. "Oh, so I guess you just decided you could take the spotlight away from me. Maybe I should teach you a lesson," as Bakugo would slam his hand into his fist, as he would then start maniacally laughing, as he would slam his hand down, burning away at her skin. She would end up screaming in pain as tears would flow endlessly out of her eyes. As Izuku, hearing the screams of pain, would end up turning the corner, seeing Bakugo just violently destroying away and eating away at Lisa's skin with his burning explosion quirk, as Izuku would yell for Bakugo to stop, and he can't believe he wanted to be a villain. "How are you acting like this, Bakugo? You want to become a hero. You're acting like a villain right now." As Bakugo would violently turn his head towards Izuku. "Oh, do you want some, Izuku? You're just a quirkless little brat. How could I expect you to take on me? You haven't even had your quirk yet activate." As Izuku would yell for Bakugo to stop acting like such an idiot, as Bakugo would start to rush towards Izuku. As Izuku, who acting on his own, would pull his fist back, clenching his fingers all tightly together, before slamming his fist into Bakugo's cheek. As Bakugo's head would violently turn the other way, as now a bruise would start to form around Bakugo's cheek. Holding it tightly, he would glance towards Izuku, now with tears in his eyes from the pain. "Damn you, Izuku. You'll pay for this. I'll make you pay." As Bakugo would then rush off, as he would end up hopping on his bus, as it would then just explode off back to wherever the houses were that it had to drop off all the students. Izuku would grab Lisa's hand before pulling her up, as her shaky hand was barely being able to heal her injuries. No, no, no. I missed my bus. My parents are never gonna forgive me for this. As Izuku would just tell Lisa, calm down. I'm sure your parents would forgive you for missing the bus, as long as you tell them for what happened. As Izuku then grabbed her hand even tighter before pulling her into his car. As his mother had gotten the day off, she would then ask her if she could drive Lisa back home, as she had missed her bus. Izuku was afraid to tell his mother what he had done, not wanting her to be angry at him for just going in an act to try to save someone. He wasn't sure how his mother would react, as she had always told him not to hurt others, and he was confused on what he had done. He wasn't sure what self-defense had meant. And so, later that night, Inko would end up getting a call from Mitsuki Bakugo, another one of her closest friends. Hey, Inko, my son told me that your son and his friend's girl named Lisa had beaten him up today. Inko would say, what? No, Izuku would never do such a thing. I've told him not to do something so vile. As Izuku would end up overhearing Inko saying that, she would end up holding her mouth shut as tears would out of her eyes. Her son couldn't have been a bully. She made sure Izuku wasn't acting like a bully. It was all strange. Izuku would never do something such in an idiotic fashion. As Inka would end up inviting Mitsuki over, as she would end up seeing the bruise along Bakugo's cheek, as Inka would also end up inviting Lisa's parents over as well, playing along Lisa, as they would end up sitting them all down, as Bakugo would just be maniacally smirking away, thinking that he had caught them all in his trap, as Inko would look down towards Izuku before calmly asking him what his side of the story was. So I was walking out of the school and I heard screams and crying, and so I turned around the corner and I saw Bakugo holding his hand to Lisa's just arm, burning away at her skin. As Inko would end up looking on towards Mitsuki, as Izuku's words had been fluent, he hadn't stuttered at all. It sounded like Izuku was completely telling the truth, as Lisa would end up nodding her head as well. That's actually why I missed the bus today, because he held me there and caused me to miss it. The stories matched up, however, Bakugo's conflicted with this. However, Lisa had no just marks or bruises on her. She had completely healed them away. However, there was a tiny little scar going up her arm where the healing process had just started, as Bakugo had a full-blown bruise on his cheek from Izuku's punch. As Izuku would end up seeing the scar, he would point to it without saying anything. This would draw the attention of all of the parents' eyes, as they would then look down to where the scar was on Lisa's arm. So it appears Izuku was telling the truth, as they would look on to see the scar go down her arm, as many of them would look on towards Bakugo and Mitsuki, as she was now staring angrily down towards Bakugo. How dare you! As she would lift up her hand, slamming it down onto Bakugo's head. I thought I told you not to be such a jerk all the time. You need to learn a lesson. She would grab Bakugo's arm before yanking him up and pulling him out of the door. As he angrily sitting there, she would end up dragging him out, as he looked like a complete toddler having a temper tantrum, not wanting to move. As the next day would end up coming, as finally Izuku would ask his mother to take him to the Quirk doctor. Inko had started to begun getting worried that Izuku's quirk wasn't forming. It was a couple weeks off from Izuku's 4th birthday, as Izuku had just turned 4 a couple weeks prior. And so with the formation of Izuku's quirk not happening, she would take him to the Quirk doctor to get him examined. As they would walk into the office, they would sit down, as Inko would then check Izuku in. As a couple minutes would pass, as a doctor would then walk into the room, holding up a sheet. Yes, Izuku Midori and the Midoriya family. Can you please stand up for me and follow me? Izuku and his mother would stand up, following the doctor off into a random room, as they would end up being seated. Alright, Izuku, we're just going to take a small blood test. You're gonna feel a sharp pinch up in your arm. The doctor would get out a needle, cleaning the area before putting the needle into Izuku's arm before taking blood out, as he would then disappear into the lab, testing it, as he would then come back with the results just moments after. Well, we do have some good news. I don't really have any bad news to report. Izuku does have a quirk. We just have no clue what it is, as I think it's a new quirk in our database. We have nothing to pretty much go off of it. So, I guess just start trying random things, trying to see what his quirk might be. Inko would nod her head, just showing that she understood the doctor's words, as she would put her hand down towards Izuku's, as he would then grab a hold of his mother's hand. She would then walk off towards the car, putting him into his car seat, as they would then drive off back to their family house. So, Izuku, let's go ahead and try some of the tests the doctor suggested. As they would then begin this, however, nothing seemed to end up working, as years would end up passing, and Izuku's quirk would never form. Izuku was quite saddened by this, but had just grown to forget about it. He could honestly care less, as every time someone asked him about what his quirk was, Izuku just said, I really don't use it. I could care less if I had one or not. I just don't want to use it right now, which of course was a lie, as Izuku had seen what kids like Bakugo Katsuki had done to quirkless kids throughout the years, causing them to move away or just strangely disappear and never be heard from again. So Izuku didn't want to become like them. However, as the years would end up passing from when Izuku was 4 up until he was 10, Izuku, every time he would get back from school, he would rush into his father's study, as he would end up looking throughout all of the massive books of the collection his father had built up throughout the years. Izuku loved to learn, and he especially loved medical history and just all the different types of diseases that Izuku could learn about throughout all of these books. As Izuku would learn about different types of bacteria, infections, diseases, cancer, all of these different sorts of things, Izuku would start to just grow up and hope to be a doctor one day, just like his parents had become, as his parents would end up even buying him extra books so that he could learn about it during recess, as his father didn't want him to take any of his expensive books out to school. However, with these, they could just tell Izuku to take him out wherever he wanted, as Izuku's love to learn would explode his knowledge far past all of his students, or far past all of his just classmates, which made many of them think Izuku had an intelligence quirk, as he was far above everyone else, spending all of his free time just learning, as that's all Izuku liked to do. He would spend his time reading and doing every other sorts of things, or he'd go outside and play with some of the neighborhood kids, but he would spend a lot of his time reading, mostly more than spending time outside. However, his parents would know it'd be unhealthy if he spent all of his time locked away in a dark study with a dim light on reading a book, so they would end up shoving him outside with a couple sports, just telling him to go play, as that's what Izuku would do. However, at the age of 10, Izuku's quirk would finally form, as Izuku would end up turning the corner much like he'd done when he was 4, as he would finally see Bakugo smirking around with Lisa, just standing beneath him. If it isn't my punching bag. Are you ready for your daily beating? As Izuku would look on in shock. He had never thought his best friend was being bullied by Bakugo. He thought he'd finally just leave her alone after what he had done and punched him that one time. But no, she had been bullied, and her healing quirk had caused her to hide it away, as Bakugo had made sure not to make things too severe so that it left a scar, but he'd made sure that it still hurt. As Izuku would look on to see Bakugo smirking maniacally, just laughing, as his punching bag, being Lisa, was standing before him. Damn it, Bakugo! Haven't you learned what I told you 6 years ago, as Bakugo would then turn his head, glaring towards Izuku. Oh, if it isn't the quirkless Deku! Haven't you learned, Izuku? You're never gonna get a quirk. All those kids saying you have an intelligence quirk are just plain stupid. As Izuku, as if just acting on impulse, would end up asking Bakugo what 1 plus 1 is, just randomly out of the blue, as Bakugo would then just say, why the hell would I answer that? As Izuku would then smile before saying, wrong answer, Bakugo. As Bakugo all of a sudden would feel a massive punch slam into his cheek, as he would be sent flying back into the brick wall behind him, as he would end up slamming down into it before falling down to the ground, as his cheek was now fully bruised. His blood would end up flowing down throughout his nose. What the hell happened? As Izuku would now be standing above Bakugo with a cold, just glare down towards him. Don't mess with my friends, Bakugo. Maybe this will finally teach you that lesson. As Izuku would say this before putting his foot on top of Bakugo, rubbing it in. Don't be such an egotistical and arrogant brat, Bakugo. You need to learn how to be a hero, because right now, all of your dreams of becoming and beating All Might are just flying out of the window right now. As Izuku would end up walking away, as Lisa would follow behind Izuku. As we would end up seeing Bakugo get up before shaking off all of the dirt off of his face and arms. How dare that little Deku beat me up? As Izuku, however, knew he wasn't the Deku Bakugo had started calling him all those years ago. He had finally had his Quirk form, and it was quite the interesting one at that. See, Izuku's quirk works like this. Izuku asks a question towards his opponent, and that opponent has a 10-second time period to answer Izuku's question. They're not forced to answer, because if that 10-second time period expires with no answer from them, it counts as a wrong answer. However, if they end up starting or speaking within that 10-second time period, they would end up having 30 seconds to finish their answer, unless it's a short one. Say for 1 plus 1, they'd have 30 seconds to answer 2. So if they were to say, why should I answer you, that counts as an answer, and it would be wrong. So with the harder the question, the smaller the punishment, because it would be harder to get the answer right. However, if it was a very, very simple question, like what's Izuku's name, or what is 1 plus 1, this would mean the person who would get it wrong would have a massive punishment because the answer is so easy. Now, Izuku can choose what this punishment is, and Izuku can even destroy someone's quirk with this punishment. However, there's only a few questions Izuku can ask someone where that punishment would end up just counting, or it would be that high. Say if Izuku were to ask a villain what their name was, and if they answer incorrectly, it would be such an easy question Izuku could destroy their quirk. However, there's always a simple answer and a simple drawback to Izuku's quirk. All you have to do to make it a useless quirk is answer, I don't know. It cancels out Izuku's question entirely, and you don't have to answer it. So if you were just to say, I don't know, to that question, then there's going to be no punishment, and it's not counted as a wrong answer. That's the easiest way just to get out of it. However, Izuku would end up just thinking about all of his quirks, as this is what he would end up hearing in his mind, the explanation about what his quirk was, as he would end up realizing that he could never let anyone know what his weakness was, as if he were to let that get out, he would never just have a useful quirk, as the word would probably spread with how powerful his quirk is, and so it would render his quirk useless, all because everyone knew just to say, I don't know, to all of Izuku's questions. And so 5 years would end up passing, as Izuku would end up being seated in his chair as the teacher would walk into the classroom. Good afternoon, class. I recently received all of your high school papers, so let's find out where you're going. Oh, would you look at this? 2 of our students are trying to make it into UA, the Fateful Heroes School, where all the young heroes in training go to become some of the best heroes. Congratulations, you two. I wish you all luck. As the teacher would nod his head towards Izuku and Bakugo. As the day would end up passing, as Izuku would get up to try to grab his things, as Bakugo would walk over towards Izuku before slamming his hand down onto Izuku's desk. Don't you dare try to make it into UA, you brat. You couldn't even become a sidekick, Izuku. You're just a little Deku. Sure, you may have a quirk now, but it's a weak one at that. It stands no chance against someone like me. As Izuku would just sort of laugh. Sure, Bakugo, if you keep acting like that, he accepted because of attitude problems. As Izuku would walk off, completely not caring about the fuming Bakugo standing behind him. As Izuku would end up catching up with his best friend Lisa, he would end up asking her where she plans to go. Oh, I plan to go on to work at a sort of a medical school, I guess. Since I have a healing quirk, I think it'd be quite useful for me to go on and just work somewhere where I could use it. As Izuku would nod his head before saying, you'd actually make quite the good healing hero, possibly a support hero too. As she would then sort of laugh. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I really still haven't decided to do anything with it, so the high school I'm actually going to, if you do have a healing quirk, you could actually get an internship at UA, in fact. So maybe I'll see you there in a couple months. Izuku would smile towards his best friend before bidding her farewell, which could possibly be one of the last times he sees her before going off to UA. As he would bid her farewell once again, he would end up walking off into just an underpass, walking on towards the way of his house. So all of a sudden, he would start to hear just strange popping noises and gargling as he would end up looking behind him. As all of a sudden, the sewer drain would explode off, slamming into the ceiling above, sticking itself, embedding itself into the ceiling. As all of a sudden, ooze and sludge would end up forming out of it, exploding out of the now just a hole in the sewer, as it would end up smiling on towards Izuku. Oh my, what do we have here? A little kid just for me. Oh, you're a lifesaver. You're gonna save me from that damn #1 hero. As Izuku would look on towards the Sludge villain, just with not a care in the world, just with a blank stare, which kind of sent shivers down the Sludge villain's just entire body. With a cool and calm voice, Izuku would ask the Sludge villain a question. Hey, could you answer me something? I really need it. It'd be a huge favor. So, what's 2 plus 2? Look, kid, I don't have much time. Stop playing games with me. Izuku would smirk before muttering wrong answer. As all of a sudden, the Sludge villain would start rapidly expanding as he would look on towards Izuku just in fright. What the hell did you do to me? As Izuku would then look up, now staring directly into the Sludge villain's eyes. You gave me the wrong answer, so I'm gonna give you a punishment for it. As the Sludge villain would end up exploding, sending little tiny vials of sludge flying everywhere, coating the entire wall of the underpass in the sludge. As all of a sudden, All Might would end up jumping out of the sewer to see a sludge-covered kid, along with sludge all over the underpass. Whoa, kid, did you do this? Yeah, I acted in self-defense. So, All Might, I actually have a couple questions for you. Okay, I guess since you did me a favor in stopping the Sludge villain, I'll give you a question. Or I'll give you some answers to your questions. How's it like being the #1 hero? Oh, it's quite tough, having to smile and give up constant personality, making sure everyone knows they're safe when I'm around, but it's quite enjoyable. You see, All Might, I never wanted to be like you. I always wanted to be a hero, but I never understood why someone would try to become the #1 hero, having to deal with so much personality and having to deal with all of just the paparazzi and merchandise you have to deal with and all of the fans. I just don't get it. But hey, I'd have to spend a couple of days in your shoes to understand. Oh well, as Izuku would just start to walk away from All Might, as All Might would end up seeing Izuku walk away before thinking, that's quite the strange interaction I've had with someone. It really is. I've never had someone not excited to see me. I mean, he wanted to ask a couple of questions, but it just seemed so confusing. He just didn't care, All Might would say, as he ends up jumping off after collecting the sludge villain into a couple of 2-liter soda bottles. After 10 months of Izuku training, his body would end up passing, Izuku would walk in to the UA campus, marveling at how big it was. Moments before this, he had just been told by both of his parents over the phone that they'll love him either way if he makes it or not, as Izuku would just smile, knowing that that's all he needed. As he would end up walking in to the auditorium, he would look around marveling at how massive this place really was, and he was confident that he was going to make it. He was sure of it. Good morning, examinees! It is I, Present Mike. I'm gonna be the person telling you and explaining all of the things you're going to be doing here at UA. At least what you're going to be doing trying to get into this UA school. So, why don't we start it off with the written exams, so all of the people not trying to get into the hero course can go their separate ways. As President Mike would then start to explain everything about the written exam. Don't cheat or else you'll never be able to make it into another hero school. Word spreads fast throughout UA along with the rest of the hero schools around here. So I would advise you not to cheat, and that's basically it. Just answer as much questions as you possibly can in the 1-hour time period, and yeah, here you all are. As the test would all be passed out by volunteers at the UA school, as Izuku would look on towards the sheet. It was all easy. Izuku knew every single answer. As many people, Izuku would look around, seeing many people with their hands to their forehead, struggling to answer even the first question. However, as Izuku would grip the pencil, his hands would start to fly through the paper, as the sounds would echo throughout the building that had once been silent. Now many people would find themselves staring on at Izuku, who was flipping through the pages just with ease, as he would end up slamming the pages back down, as he would end up lifting them all up, stacking them together, just slamming them onto the desk to make them all perfectly even, as he would end up walking up to the front desk before dropping it into the turn-in just area. As Izuku would walk back up to his seat, sitting down, as everyone would just look on. They had a 1-hour time period to do this entire test, which many of them thought they couldn't even make it past the first page. And there Izuku was, having just finished the entirety of it within 5 minutes. How could he have done that? 5 minutes to finish a complete 10-page a 10-page quiz. It took Izuku 30 seconds to complete this, each page. They were just in shock, seeing they couldn't believe it, and neither could Present Mike, as he would end up just putting his hand to his forehead, just in complete amazement. Oh, Nezu's gonna love this one. And sure enough, someone would end up opening the door after watching over the security cameras, as President Mike would be told to give the test sheet off to one of the volunteers, who actually had opened the door, as they would end up asking for Izuku to follow them with their Izuku's test sheet now in hand, as Izuku would end up walking up to Nezu's office. Nezu was quite suspicious, as no one had ever completed the test in such an easy and short amount of time, and so obviously someone thought Izuku was possibly cheating, and so they would end up bringing Izuku in to ask him a couple of questions. So, young man, your name is what exactly? Oh, my name's Izuku Midoriya, and you're trying out to get into which class? Oh, I'm trying to try out and get into the hero course. As Nezu would nod his head before giving Izuku another quiz, which was a backup quiz in case anyone had actually cheated and had got through it so quickly. And so with that, Izuku, which all of these questions were designed to make someone get it wrong. So Izuku would easily pass through it again within 10 minutes. So Nezu would say, well, I guess you're cheating. No one has actually seen this test besides me and a couple of the teachers. So I guess you're just really smart then. gonna have fun with you. Maybe I'll possibly even teach you some tricks. As Izuku would just smile, already having impressed the principal of UA, and it sure enough sounded like he was going to make the school. So Izuku, now with all the confidence in the world, he would be escorted back down to where all of the people were taking the test, as you would end up seeing people still taking the test, with only a few of them having turned it in after 45 minutes. So with Izuku now sitting down, everyone would end up finishing after the last 15 minutes would end up expiring. So with that, President Mike would ask for all the test sheets to come back up to him, as he would end up yelling at the top of his lungs, "Alright, everyone who's not taking the hero course can now go ahead and leave." As everyone who would not be trying to make it into the hero exam or take it would end up walking out, leaving a ton more people who wanted to make it into the hero program. As Izuku would end up looking around, seeing all of the competition, he would end up smiling, knowing that this was going to be quite the challenge, however he was up for it. As Izuku would be sitting there waiting for everyone just to get settled down, as President Mike would finally start to speak once again. "So, I guess we should get started with the hero exam, shouldn't we?" As President Mike would then start to just laugh. "So, the hero exam is going to have 3 different robots, a 1-pointer, 2-pointer, and 3-pointer. There's also going to be quite the distraction, so I would suggest just avoiding something called the 0-pointer. It's best to avoid it, as it's merely just a waste of time designed to try to block you and make it so that you don't get on past the rounds." As all of the volunteers would end up passing out these cards with a letter on it, which had a letter 1, B, or C. These letters would end up telling all of the people whether they were going to be placed in A, C, or D, which would be the city name. So with all of that, they would end up walking out to where their city was located, as Izuku would be in City A. As Izuku's standing in the middle of this hallway, all of a sudden the doors would slowly creak open, and as if on just instinct, Izuku would rush off right into the city, as the people behind him would start to snicker about how he's going to be disqualified for running without just being told to. However, all of them would end up hearing on the intercom that they need to get their butts inside, as they should have been following him. A hero never has to be told to go save someone. As all of them would rush off, Izuku would start to think about how he was going to destroy robots, as he would end up seeing a lone 1-pointer standing in the middle of a field. So Izuku was gonna run up there and just punch him. However, Izuku would do this as his hand would immediately start to be sore. This metal wasn't some plastic that Izuku could just punch and it would easily just fall apart. This was metal and it was steel. It wasn't going to easily fall apart to just some punch or flick of the wrist by Izuku. So with that, Izuku would end up walking into one of the buildings before sitting down, as he would start to think, how the hell am I going to be able to to stop this? As Izuku would just run around not understanding and not knowing how he'd be able to beat these robots. He couldn't ask the robots questions, as his quirk relied on a human brain, or just a brain in general. And so, without that, Izuku couldn't really defeat any of the robots, so he would go pretty much the entire exam without defeating any of them, as he would all just be sitting around looking at everyone destroying robots, as he would just be walking around, just staring aimlessly at them. Izuku knew that the principal at UA liked him, mostly because of how intelligent he was, so he was at least going to make it into one of the general courses. However, he didn't know if he was going to even make it into one of the hero courses, that is. So as Izuku would be sitting there, all of a sudden, a massive 0-pointer would appear out of nowhere, stomping its feet on the ground, as Izuku would look up in complete shock. How the hell was he going to stop something like this? As Izuku would end up hearing a cry for help, he would look on towards where he had heard it from. He would see a girl trapped underneath a bunch of rocks, as he would rush over there. where he would then see the zero-pointer pushing closer and closer to where the girl was. He would grab one of the boulders, lifting it up before throwing it off of her, as Izuku would do this many times before picking her up, making sure not to lift up her legs, pulling out some of the wood in one of the collapsed buildings nearby, as he would end up finding rope nearby, tying it together, keeping just the young girl's legs completely still, making sure that if they were broken, they wouldn't be broken any further, as Izuku would end up picking her up before rushing off away from where the zero-pointer was, as he would end up setting her down, as Recovery Girl would end up appearing out of nowhere to check on her to see if she was okay. As finally, the zero-pointer would suddenly deactivate, as President Mike would announce that the hero exams had now officially ended and that they may now go home. Izuku would assist Recovery Girl in helping her get the thing that Izuku had put around the girl's legs off, as the Recovery Girl would praise Izuku for knowing how to do this, as she would end up asking Izuku if his parents were doctors, which Izuku would say yes, as she would end up nodding her head, as Izuku would then help her up, as Uraraka would say that she was fine and that she could move her legs and she could tell they weren't broken. Recovery Girl would still take her to just the ER place in UA just to make sure everything was alright, as she would end up telling Izuku that he may now go home, which Izuku would then do so. Izuku would end up going home before sitting at his desk, as he would have all night to think about what he had done. He just couldn't believe it. His hopes of becoming a hero had basically just vanished. He knew he wasn't going to make it into the hero course. He didn't destroy a singular robot. How could he make it into the hero course? It just couldn't make sense if he did. So Izuku would be sitting there just pondering all night about just what he had done during the entrance exam, as he would end up telling his parents their worries. However, they would just dismiss it, saying that Izuku's fine. They've seen him develop his quirk and hone his skills, and they knew he was going to become a very smart and powerful hero. As Izuku would smile, thanking them, as he would end up sitting down onto the ground, as he would just be sitting on the floor of his room, thinking long and hard about what he had done. 2 weeks later, Izuku would end up receiving a package in the mail and an envelope, which said the envelope should be opened first. As Izuku would open the envelope in his room, a small circular disc would fall out of it. "Hello, Izuku Midoriya. It's I, Nesu, the principal here at UA. Of course, you already know that because of our meeting that I had about 2 weeks ago. You've piqued my interest, Izuku, and so you have made it into the hero course, Class 1B. Sadly, you didn't make Class 1A because of your lack of points. However, you did make it into Class 1B. So, I thank you for just participating in the entrance exam. Also, I would actually like you to stay after class after the first day here at your new hero school of UA. Now, if you open the box, it will be your UA uniform, and this package, or this disc, will now explode in around 5, 4, 3, 2. Before Nezu could finish talking, Izuku would throw the disc out of his window, as it would then explode in the air as ashes would fall down to the ground. As Izuku would be smiling down, just thinking, at least I made the hero course. I may not be in Class 1A, but I'm still in the hero course after all. Izuku would walk in to Class 1B's just room after the night had passed, as he would end up sitting down in a window seat waiting for people to arrive. The second person to arrive into the classroom was an orange-haired girl. Izuku would see her walk up to him before placing her hand out. "Hi, I'm Itsuka Kendo. Your name is?" Izuku would shake her hand before saying that his name is Izuku Midoriya and that it's nice to meet you. She would say that it's nice to meet you too, as she would then sit down next to Izuku. "So, did it tell you how many points you got in the entrance exam?" Izuku would say, they said there was something about rescue points and 70? Kendo would end up nodding her head, saying that she had gotten around 65 or so. Izuku would say, So do you think you performed quite well? Well, actually, they said I got the first and I got second out of all the people that made Class 1B. So I think we both just barely missed the cutoff for Class 1A, which kind of sucks. Izuku would nod his head, agreeing with her. Yeah, I guess that sucks. But at least we made the hero course, that is. So we shouldn't be dwelling on the past. We should just be happy we made it. Kendo would nod her head as the rest of Class 1B would end up piling in, as Izuku would end up just be sitting there waiting for their teacher to arrive. Hello, Class 1B, Vlad King would end up saying. Throughout the years, Class 1A has bested us, and so I don't want to be bested by those Class 1A brats again. I've never actually beaten Class 1A, which is because we're Class 1B. At least that's just the answer that all of the Class 1A kids have come up with, because they're just better being in Class 1A. But this year's different. Don't you all agree we should try to stop just those arrogant Class 1A kids thinking that they're better than all of us? Many of Class 1B would just say, this is the first day of school. Can we stop worrying about this? Well, anyway, our first activity is actually going to be put up against Class 1A. It's going to be just a test of all of our quirks. So, we're not going to be doing it with Class 1A. We're going to be doing the same activity as Class 1A is doing. Many of them would nod their heads, as Vlad King would then just show them where their PE uniforms were and where they were down in the locker rooms, as Izuku would end up going down to the locker rooms, putting on his PE uniform before heading off towards the testing site Vlad King had told them to go. Izuku would make it down towards where he had told him to go, as he would be sitting under a tree waiting for everyone else to arrive. Vlad King would slowly arrive to see Izuku sitting there, as he would end up seeing the rest of Class 1B make it. He would yell for them all to hurry up, as they're going to have to be doing a lot more training than just simply walking to this. If they keep on walking, they're probably just going to have to do a lot of sprints. As many of them would rush over to where it was, as he would then yell, "Now that's the spirit! Alright, so, here," he would toss the ball to Izuku. "You got first out of all of Class 1B kids in the entrance exam, so why don't you go ahead and throw the ball as far as you possibly can?" Izuku would tell Vlad King along the rest of the class that his quirk isn't meant for throwing a ball, but okay, as Izuku would grip the ball tightly before winding back his arm and throwing the ball as far as he could. It was way above average for just an average person, and that's because Izuku played many games of baseball, as he was a pitcher for the local team for them, and for where he lived. So Izuku was quite good at throwing, but it was nothing compared to, say, what Bakugo Katsuki had gotten using his explosion quirk. However, Izuku knew that these little activities just to test their quirks meant nothing in the form of combat. And so when all of the testing things were all said and done, Izuku would actually be quite close towards last place. He was an above average person, having been training for his almost entire life from 10 till 15. However, Izuku doesn't have something like a strength quirk like All Might would that would excel him above the competition in something like this. As Izuku would be walking back to class, Kendo would ask Izuku what his quirk was, which Izuku would then sort of just laugh. "Well, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. I made it apparent not to tell anyone what my quirk is. Not even the principal here at UA knows. They just know I saved someone. For all they know, I'm quirkless. However, they'll see once I'm in combat," as Kendo would just awkwardly nod her head as Izuku would walk off back to the classroom, where they would then be dismissed. Izuku would be walking out as he would walk the opposite direction from the exit. Kendo would end up running up to Izuku before telling him that the exit's that way. However, Izuku would just sort of laugh. "Yeah, I actually was told to go to the office by Nesu. I don't know why he wanted me to come there, but he just did, I guess." Kendo would nod her head before walking off, thinking that this Izuku boy is quite strange. Izuku would walk into Nezu's office, as Nezu would just smile. "Ah, Izuku, you've arrived. Now, do you mind telling me what your quirk is?" Well, Nezu, I can't really tell you what my quirk is. It's for the sake of just being the element of surprise. I don't really like bragging to people, and so telling someone what my quirk is kind of seems like bragging to me. Oh, come on, Izuku, you can tell me. Please, I'm the principal here at UA. You can trust me with even your greatest secrets. Izuku would just sort of laugh before telling Nezu that there's no chance, as Nezu would then just sigh. Well, anyway, Izuku, I actually wanted to talk to you about, since you were the smartest person out of all the examinees, I wanted to take you under my wing and sort of teach you everything I know. As Izuku would just look on, shocked. Are you sure, Nezu? That's quite a lot of responsibility for just some random kid you met not even 3 weeks ago. As Nezu would just laugh. Yeah, but I have faith in you, Izuku. I know you're going to be quite strong one day, and I have a feeling you'll even end up teaching here. But that's besides the point. So, why don't we go ahead and get started with some advanced lessons that even some college people have no clue about. As Izuku would just sort of nervously nod his head, as Nezu would then start teaching Izuku all of the advanced random stuff that he knew about science, just space, and everything random that he could possibly just pull up out of nowhere out of his brain. So Izuku, as the hour would pass, Izuku would be told by Nezu that he may now go home as their lesson for the first day had now ended. As Izuku would end up walking back home, he would end up making it there, opening up the door, as he would end up sitting down onto the couch, as he would be greeted by his cat, where it would then come in and just sit down right on Izuku's lap, as Izuku would then start to calm himself down after that. As Nezu had just exploded all of this knowledge into Izuku's head, it was crazy, and Izuku thought and just mumbled a lot. Nezu was like 100 times worse than Izuku was, as Izuku, however, would smile knowing that he was going to get a hell of a lot smarter within the next couple of years here at his new school of UA. As a couple weeks would end up passing, Vlad King would make sure to make all of the Class 1B kids just make sure that their training was a living nightmare, making them do sprints and stamina activities every single day until they dropped to the floor completely soaked in sweat. As he would make sure they did this every single day, day in and day out, as he didn't want them to just lose to Class 1A, as he was training them for their fight against Class 1A, as they're going to be doing something with Class 1A for their first hero class. So, as the day would end up passing, all of them would walk into school the days after, knowing that it was their day for their first hero class, and all of them couldn't wait. They were jumping up and down in their seats in pure excitement. As the classes would end up passing, they would end up finally having their hero class end up coming to them. So they would all just be wondering in excitement and anticipation, hoping that their hero teacher was somebody cool. However, when they saw Vlad King walk in, all of them would then droop down. It's the same old Vlad King, their teacher, of course, as Vlad King would tell them all to cheer up, as they're going to need to be excited for their fight against Class 1B, or Class 1A, as many of them would nod their heads, as Vlad King would then lead them down to where all of their hero costumes had been located. As they would all be told to grab their suitcase located with their seat number, as Izuku would end up grabbing it. Many people would end up just looking at Izuku to see the dark aura just emitting off of Izuku's hero costume. They all saw it and were just completely shocked as shivers would go down their spine. It looked like a complete villain costume, as Izuku would then laugh at many people pointed it out how his costume looked like a villain. Well, that's actually kind of the point. If I want to infiltrate many of the villains' bases if they're in groups, then I'm gonna have to look the part to do so, as many of them would nervously nod their heads at Izuku, just thinking that he was kind of scary. However, there was some other people in their class that looked even scarier, so as all of them would walk down to the locker rooms, getting changed into their hero costumes, as they would then head off towards where Class 1A was located in the city, as Flat King would lead them on, where they would then see All Might just explaining what was going to happen towards Class 1A. Many of Class 1B students would say, "What? All Might's their teacher? You're kidding!" And we got old Vlad King. Man, this sucks. I wish I made it in Class 1A. Izuku would tell everyone to cheer up, saying that they should at least be happy they made it. It'd be 1,000 times worse if they didn't make it at all. So they probably should shift their attitude, and they should probably start trying to beat them. As Izuku actually heard during the sports festival, if you perform well than some of the people above you, you could possibly even take their place. As many of the students turning around him would just have their head violently turned towards Izuku, along with many of Class 1A saying, "Wait, we can't just have our spots replaced, can we?" All Might would just put his hand to the back of his neck for saying, "Well, you can. It's basically whoever's the best after a couple of months gets to move up, and whoever's not doing so well gets to move down. So that's why we're trying to train you as hard as you can so you get to keep your spots here in Class 1A. Okay, class, what we're going to be doing is something called a Heroes vs. Villains assignment. There's going to be a randomly selected team of 2, as there's going to be a team of 2 from Class 1B and a team of 2 from Class 1A faced against each other, and this is going to be called the Heroes vs. Villains. One team is going to be selected as the heroes, while the other is going to be the villains. The villains will be told to have a device made by the support course made out of paper mache, where they will then take it into this building and hide it. The heroes will have 15 minutes to either deactivate it by touching it, or capture all 2 of the hero team. Or all 2 of the villain team, that is. So, let's see what the first team's going to be. Izuku Midoriya and Kendo as the heroes versus Bakugo Katsuki and Todoroki as the villains. Many of Class 1A would just start to mutter to themselves. They had seen how powerful both Bakugo and Todoroki's quirks were, and since they hadn't seen either Izuku or Kendo's quirks at all in just play, or just they haven't seen it at all, they would end up thinking, oh, this is going to be such an easy victory for Bakugo and Todoroki, as Flat King would be keeping track about how many just wins Class 1A and Class 1B had gotten, as Izuku would end up now wearing his Plague Doctor outfit, as that's what his hero costume was, a Plague Doctor, which you all will know why in a couple of minutes, as All Might would hand the hero team the papier-mâché device before telling them all to go up and hide it into wherever they wanted in the building, as Bakugo would grab it, pulling it away from the calm Todoroki before just stomping into the building to go off and slam it somewhere just interesting. As he would end up putting it up at the top floor, he would end up seeing Todoroki, as Todoroki would tell him, "So, what plan do you think we should just have?" Bakugo would completely brush off Todoroki's words, not caring about anything Todoroki had even said, going off to do whatever the hell he decided to do. As All Might would see this, he would tell Class 1B, or the hero team, that they may now head in, as he would end up seeing that the hallways were very dark, with only a few lights dimly lighting the hallways, as he would end up telling Kendo that she should possibly be sort of a distraction for Bakugo, as Izuku would end up disappearing into one of the shadows, as Kendo was just confused on what Izuku was talking about, as Kendo, standing there, would end up seeing just sparks flying from around the corner, as they were now on the 2nd floor. All of a sudden, Bakugo would jump out of the corner before launching himself towards Kendo, as all of a sudden, Bakugo would end up hearing a question, causing him to stop directly in his tracks. "Hello, Bakugo. Do you mind telling me what your name is?" As Bakugo would look around, just aimlessly looking for whoever the hell said it. "Who the hell said that?" Why don't you come out here and face me like a man? As Kendo, who had now disappeared out of Bakugo's eyesight, as Bakugo would be looking around, as all of a sudden the plague doctor, being Izuku, would appear with a cane in his hand, using it basically as a walking stick, even though Izuku didn't have to use one, just for an added effect. So, I guess you got your own name wrong. That's quite the accomplishment. As all of a sudden, Bakugo would fall down to his knees, now with a pulsing headache, holding it, as he would end up looking up shakily towards Izuku, as he would end up yelling for Izuku what the hell he had done to him, as all of a sudden swollen just lumps would end up appearing out of nowhere in Bakugo's body, as he would all of a sudden just look on in confusion, yelling at what the hell Izuku had done. He was just completely confused. Well, I guess you're not educated about some prior diseases that ravaged over Europe thousands of years ago. It's called the plague, Bakugo, otherwise known as the bubonic plague. So, why don't you take a nap? Izuku would say, hitting Bakugo on the head with his cane, as all of a sudden all of Bakugo's symptoms just instantly disappeared, as Bakugo now would be unconscious. See, Izuku had a part of his quirk that he had discovered. He had discovered that he could punish anyone with any sort of punishment, and so Izuku could give them diseases if they were to answer one of his questions wrong. If they were to get the question right, they wouldn't get anything at all, so they wouldn't have any punishment. If they were to get a question right, they would actually get a boost for their quirk. So if they were to get a question wrong, and Izuku chose, say, the bubonic plague as the sort of just punishment, Bakugo, or say Bakugo either, would end up, if it were a harder question and he got it wrong, it would be slower. It would be a slow infection. However, if it was an easy one and he got it wrong, it'd be a very fast-spreading one. So, not dwelling on that topic any much longer, Izuku would end up walking through the halls with Kendo, just staring at Bakugo's limpless body now in her massive hand. What did you do to him? Oh, I simply just did something to him. You really don't need to know. I like to keep what I do a secret so no one knows what's coming. It's the element of surprise, of course, as Izuku would say, just laughing as the laugh would echo throughout the halls, as many of the people just watching it would end up having shivers go down their spines. They were just in utter shock at how terrifying Izuku was. Walking throughout the halls, they would eventually make it up to the top floor, as Izuku would end up seeing Todoroki through the window on one of the doors. So, Kendo, I suggest you go in first, throwing Bakugo at Todoroki, possibly causing a distraction. Kendo would nod her head, as she would end up kicking the door flat open before throwing Bakugo right at Todoroki. Not wanting to hurt Bakugo, he didn't use his ice to stop the projectile coming flying towards him, so he would just subject to let it hit him. However, as it would end up hitting him, his eyes would end up shutting, as all of a sudden Izuku, standing it right above him, as Todoroki would look on as if he were looking right into death's face itself. He was just completely shocked. Was he dead? No, he was about to be struck by a cane by Izuku. As Izuku would slam the cane right down into Todoroki's head, this would cause Todoroki to be knocked out, as both Kendo and Izuku would touch the device, as Class 1B's teacher, Vlad King, would jump up in the air. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about! Show those Class A brats that you're better than them, as all of Class 1A would look on in just complete shock. None of them had expected it to just be done so easily. Izuku and Kendo hadn't even had a finger be laid on them. As they would be walking back, they would grab both Todoroki and Bakugo's body, bringing it back towards where all of the other people were, as Vlad King would congratulate them, saying, "Good job. I expected no less from you two," as All Might would say, "Alright, the next up is," as the rest of the class would end up going and doing their heroes' first fill-ins. Class 1B would perform much better than Class 1A was, as Vlad King had made them train even harder than Class 1A had even imagined, making them do sprint stamina exercise and then training their Quirk every day, even asking them to stay after class a couple of hours to do such a thing, as this was the determination Vlad King had to defeat Class 1A. He wanted to best Class 1A once and for all, and so that's what he set out to do. And so Class 1B would best Class 1A in a score of around 7 match wins to 5, as Vlad King would end up tying Class 1A in overall victories 1-1, since Class 1A had bested his Class B with the Quirk testing that they had done on the first day of school. As these would end up passing, another event of Class 1A versus Class 1B would end up taking place. This would be a 1v1 tournament, sort of as training for the sports festival that was coming up in just 2 months. So as they would all walk into class one day, they would be told to put on their PE uniforms, as they are going to be practicing for the sports festival. Many of them would get excited, wondering what their practice was going to be. However, when they heard that it was just another fight against Class 1A, many of them would just not be as excited. This practice is going to be a 1v1 tournament against all of Class 1A. Many of you will probably be against each other as well. It's going to be mimicking the final part of the UA Sports Festival that's going to be happening in 2 months, like I said before. So why don't we head down to the locker rooms and change into your PE uniforms, and then I will have you all follow me to where you will be practicing. As Vlad King would then take them all down to the locker rooms, where they would then get changed before being told to follow him, as he would then lead them to where the 1v1 arena was going to be. As they would all walk in, they would see this air-conditioned building, as they would see the platform where they would all be partaking in a battle against each other. As Vlad King would then tell them that this is going to be a 1v1 tournament, and that each one of them are going to be facing off against one of Class 1A. It's not going to have a direct end, you're just going to keep on fighting until you're eliminated. And so we're just going to see how many people get eliminated from each class and how many end up surviving once all of the classes are done. So if you get eliminated, you will be forced to go outside and do sprints, while the rest of us are inside in this air-conditioned building. As the teachers had decided to do this on a blistering day where it was extremely hot, and so they made building air-conditioned so that it would just be an added bonus so that they could perform even higher, wanting to not be outside in the burning sun all day. So as all of them would be sitting there, the first match would end up being called up. It would be Izuku versus Mina Ashido, as Kendo would walk up to Izuku, wishing him luck, as the rest of his class would do the same, as Izuku would walk up onto the arena, as he would then see Mina Ashido walk up as well. Good luck. As Izuku would say this, Mina would nod her head, just in agreement, showing a sign of respect towards Izuku. As Vlad King would yell for the match to start, Mina would rush towards Izuku, using her acid to slide on throughout the ground. As she would start to rush towards Izuku, Izuku would see that she was aiming her hand, about to throw acid directly on towards Izuku. As Izuku would plant his hands onto the ground in sort of a sprinter's position, this would throw Mina off guard. As she would throw just acid to where Izuku was, he would jump over it, as he would then position himself to fall directly on where Mina was heading. As she would end up trying to just steer herself away, she was going too fast, as her turn would end up being significantly wider than she had hoped. As Izuku would end up grabbing and planting his hands on her shoulders, as he would end up using this as an added panic effect, as if she was panicking, she wouldn't be able to answer the questions properly. And so with Mina now panicking, just rushing around, trying to shake Izuku off of him, Izuku would whisper in her ear, "I have a question for you. Do you mind telling me what 1 + 1 is?" Izuku would say clear into her ear, as she would be skating And she would then look up towards Izuku before saying, why do you need that now? As Izuku would then smile directly on towards her. You played right into my hand. As Izuku would all of this sudden hear a just snap, as she would end up falling down to the ground, her legs now twisted into the opposite direction, as she would cry out in pain. Izuku had decided to break her legs. It wasn't the most severe punishment that he could have given her, being as she got 1 plus wrong. However, it was still quite the severe punishment, as her legs now being broken, she'd be yelping out in pain as if trying to cry out for someone to come and help her. As Aizawa would rush in before glancing at Izuku, asking what the hell he had done, as Izuku would simply just tap Mina right on the forehead, saying that he had simply broken her legs and that they're all healed now. As Aizawa would look on in shock and just complete confusion at how Izuku was handling things. He had complete disregard that someone in his own school had been crying out in pain, as if he was just didn't care. As Izuku would walk back to his class smiling, as many of them can congratulate Izuku on his victory. However, many of them would ask Izuku why he was so cold towards the other class, as Izuku would then glance towards them before speaking, looking on at the battle that was now ongoing. Do you think villains are going to show you mercy? What I'm doing is preparing Class 1A and the rest of you all. I'm still a student here, but if I don't show any mercy and I show many of the people in battle against me what real pain is, then they'll know what it's going to be like to be injured against a villain. Hopefully it makes them want to train even harder. As Izuku would be saying this, some of the class would nod, just agreeing that Izuku's ideology sort of makes sense, but it doesn't really. So Izuku would be watching it as the rest of his class would end up going. Many of them would end up winning, while a lot of them would also end up losing, as half of the class had now been gone, and Class 1A and Class 1B actually happened to be tied, as Izuku would end up being called up onto the next match. He was against Todoroki Shoto, or Shoto Todoroki. Izuku had faced him off against in the Heroes vs. Villains assignment, and so Izuku knew what his quirks were. However, he really hadn't seen them. He had heard what his quirks were through just word of mouth in the UA school about how he was the son of Endeavor and had a cool just fire and ice quirk. As Izuku would end up stepping up onto the arena, he would hit Todoroki good luck, as Todoroki would end up strategizing against Izuku, as he would end up seeing what had happened every time someone had gotten one of Izuku's questions wrong. So he would end up just trying to answer all of Izuku's questions, as Todoroki had been studying Izuku very closely after his loss. Having seen what he had done to Mina, he still quite had no clue what Izuku was, as he had asked her a question and all of a sudden her legs were broken. He would decide that it was his questions that had caused it, but still had no backbone and evidence that could just determine it fully. So with this going on, Izuku would walk up onto the arena, as he would end up seeing Todoroki smirking towards him. I know what your quirk is, Izuku. As Izuku would end up smiling. Oh, you do now, really? That's quite interesting. What is my quirk? As Todoroki would end up just blanking, as he would end up just saying, oh, is it a punish? Is it sort of a invisible punch type quirk or something? As Izuku had completely blindsided Todoroki with this question, as Todoroki would end up feeling a pain right across his face. Wrong answer, Todoroki. Although it's something close. I do like asking questions, so maybe you could be right with the invisible torture quirk. However, that's still quite the ways off, I would say, as Izuku would now appear right below Todoroki, slamming his hands onto the ground, propelling himself upward, as his hand would go right into Todoroki's jaw, sending his teeth colliding with the upper jaw, as his teeth now grinding against each other, as Izuku would see Todoroki jump back before throwing ice directly at Izuku. Come on, Todoroki, why don't you use your fire? It'd be quite nice of you to use it. However, I can't really just make you do it. I don't understand why you don't use half of your quirk. You'd be a hell of a lot stronger if you happened to use it, as Izuku would say, as if taunting Todoroki. However, Todoroki wouldn't bat an eye, as he would end up rushing in towards Izuku, now on a one-on-one. However, Todoroki would make his fists just embedded with ice. As each punch, Izuku would easily dodge this before walking up to Todoroki once again. So, Todoroki, why don't you tell me? Why do you have that scar there on your face? As Todoroki would end up explaining, just saying, you don't need to know that. As Izuku, who had no idea what the answer was, would smirk. You know the exact answer to that, which sort of makes that an easy question. Well, for you, that is. For me, not so much. But since it was still quite the easy question for you, and you decided to disobey my question and give me a stupid answer, why don't we go ahead and give you the same thing that I gave Mina over there? So he would point to out of the window where he would end up seeing Mina just sprinting along the track with another hero pushing her on, making sure that she didn't stop. As Todoroki all of a sudden would feel his legs just crumble beneath him, falling down to the ground. He would feel sharp pain in there as he wouldn't be able to move them. As Izuku would end up standing over Todoroki as he would look on towards Hat King and Aizawa, as Aizawa would be forced to give Izuku the win once again, as Izuku would end up going on to the next round, as Todoroki would end up being healed by the tap of Izuku's finger. I'll go ahead and heal you right now, just to get you back up on your feet, I would say, Izuku would say before walking off, as Izuku would end up beating the rest of the people, where he would end up meeting Bakugo Katsuki in the finals. However, he had met one of his friends in Class 1B in the semifinals, Itsuka Kenda, that is. As Izuku would be standing across from her, she would end up smirking as she would finally be able to tell Izuku what she had been wanting to tell him for so long. After seeing all the times you used your quirk, I've really wanted to face you, and finally, determination has gotten me here. I'll finally get to see your quirk in action, she would say as the match would begin, as she would rush off towards Izuku, making her hands bigger, swiping at him. However, Izuku would use his agility to jump off, clinging to the side of the arena, as he would end up propelling himself upwards, as Kendo would end up looking on towards him. So, Kendo, why don't you go ahead and tell me something? Kendo would end up looking on towards Izuku, as Izuku would end up thinking of a question in his head. I actually can't think of any question to ask you. I guess. Hey, do you mind telling me how many sides of a Rubik's Cube there are? I really need to know. My mother asked me a couple nights ago. As Kendo would just blanket say, 7? She would say, oh, come on, Kendo, how could you get something so easy wrong? There's 6 sides on a Rubik's Cube. I'm guessing you never had one, though, but you've heard of one. No matter, Izuku would say before flicking his wrist up, and all of a sudden, suddenly a whoosh would go right up, as a massive punch would be released as an uppercut right into her jaw. She would end up being sent flying upwards. Izuku would jump into action, punching down on her stomach, sending her flying down into the ground, embedding her into the concrete. As Vlad King would end up saying that the match was over and that Kendo couldn't go on. As Izuku would pick Kendo up, offered his hand, as he would pull her up before saying good try, Kendo. Maybe you'll beat me in a couple months after you've done some training. Kendo would just smile on towards Izuku before agreeing to that proposition. As Izuku would walk up onto the arena, he would end up seeing Bakugo standing across from him. You know, Izuku, I've wanted to face you ever since you've beaten me. I'll finally show you that you're really the pebble you are. I'll crush you beneath my feet, Izuku. As Izuku would just laugh. As the match would begin, Bakugo would jump off towards Izuku, fuming. He really wanted to destroy Izuku in a fight. However, Izuku would be smirking, and as soon as Bakugo would reach up towards him, Izuku would raise his hand before saying that he forfeits the match. as Bakugo would be forced to stop in his tracks, just completely in shock. All of Class 1A and Class 1B, who had been watching it, having been brought in to watch the finals, were just confused. Why would Izuku forfeit the match? It clearly looked like he was going to win. He steamed through the entirety of the competition. Why would he now just forfeit? As Izuku would be walking off, many of the students would just ask Izuku why he decided to forfeit, as Izuku would just smile. It's not worth my time. And plus, I knew Bakugo had been wanting to beat me all this time, and so a forfeit would actually be worse than him losing, because now he wouldn't have known if he was going to beat me. So now he'd have to sit there and just wonder what could have been. Oh, the torture that must be going on inside his brain. It's quite funny, actually, Izuku would be saying as he would then end up walking off. As Izuku would end up walking off, as the day had end up ending, Izuku, of course, would go up to Nezu's office to get his extra training from Nezu. As he would be there, he would end up learning about all different sorts of things. As the day would come to an end, Izuku would walk home, where he would end up seeing his parents, as they would tell him that they were having dinner. As it had been a good couple of months since Izuku had seen his best friend Lisa, and his parents had seen Lisa's parents either. So they decided to have them over for dinner, as they would end up just having small talk all night, just asking Izuku what it was in a hero school, as they would ask Lisa about her just school and medical school and all of that. As this was all happening, the night would end up coming to an end with the parents of Lisa and Lisa herself going home, as Izuku just be sitting in his bed wondering what the next couple of days at UA were going to bring to him. Weeks would end up passing as Izuku would walk into school. He would end up stretching before all of the other classmates would end up arriving, as he would then end up sitting down. A couple minutes after Izuku arrived there, Vlad King would end up arriving as well, before putting up a massive map on the board, as he would end up greeting Izuku before saying, "Oh, good morning, Izuku. So, anyway, I might as well just tell you about this map thing since you're here early. Today we're going on a field trip with the Class 1A class. Me and Aizawa have decided to do many more activities together, so it'd be just a greater training environment. So basically, it's going to be a hero search and rescue type thing, as Vlad King would then end up pointing to just 6 and 7 different zones that were inside this massive, weird-looking building, before telling Izuku all about it. So there's going to be these just zones that you're going to have to rescue people in, which Class 1B and Class 1A, us, will be taking turns just hiding or being heroes, and or hiding as let me think of the word. Just people that have been destroyed or being trapped under things by villains. I'm really blanking on this word here. I'm sorry, Izuku. As Izuku would just sort of awkwardly laugh. Yeah, I guess you are. As the rest of the class would pile in, as Vlad King would then end up explaining what the USJ was, as he would then tell them that they can go and put their hero costumes on, and that they may now leave. As Izuku, or they may put their hero costumes on and go down to the bus bay. As they would all travel down to the bus bay, they would all hop onto the bus, where they would then just jump off towards where the USJ was. As the bus would come to a screeching halt, Izuku and the rest of the class would end up stepping outside of the bus, where they would end up seeing the Class 1A bus not so far behind them. As they would end up stepping out of the bus as well, they would all walk up where they would end up meeting the rescue hero 13, as she would end up just explaining to them what they will be doing. However, Vlad King had already explained it to his class, but Aizawa had neglected to do it to theirs. So Class 1B would end up getting just an extra lesson on the USJ and the history of it and what they're going to be doing there, rescue training, hero training in different environments, and all sorts of random things that 13 just kept going on and on and on about. As finally she would end up opening one of the massive doors, all of the classes would pile in, marveling at the USJ's massive size and beauty, as all of the their marvel would end up being cut clean short, as one of the students would point directly towards the center of it, looking on towards the massive fountain. "Man, this place is insane! Look, they even have fake villains here, too! This place is awesome!" Aizawa 13 and Vlad King's head would violently turn towards the center, where they would end up seeing villains start to pile out of this portal, as Izuku would see this time as he would end up disappearing off into the shadows. It was his specialty, after all, to just randomly disappear. As Izuku now gone from the group, many of the students wouldn't even realize, just completely in shock at what was standing before them. A massive army of villains. As Izuku sneaking off would end up blending in with the crowd of all of the villains, as he would end up seeing a portal be just right below all of the students, as they would end up falling in beneath of it. As Izuku would walk down, now in the massive horde of villains who were all just mumbling to themselves about how they're going to kill all of these UA brats. As Izuku would just be looking around, and he would finally see the people standing in the way back. As Izuku would end up walking up towards Shigaraki, the person in the back, before saying, "Yo, what are we supposed to be doing here again?" As Shigaraki would just say, "Oh my gosh, you guys really are stupid high school dropouts. I guess that's why you became thugs. I mean, I can't really be talking, I'm a villain no less. We're here to kill All Might, but sadly, it looks like that stupid idiot's shining, glowing face happened to be a no-show. So now we're focusing on all of those UA brats. So why don't you get to it and stop bothering me with this useless banter?" Shigaraki would say, shooing Izuku off, as Izuku would just nod his head, as he would end up seeing Aizawa and Vlad King jump down, as they would then start to take out the hordes of villains. However, Vlad King had seen Izuku sneak off in the very corner of his eye, as Izuku had mastered the technique and had even told Vlad King about how he was able to just disappear within darkness. As Vlad King would end up pointing out to Izuku very discreetly, saying that the person in the Plague Doctor outfit is one of their students and not to kill or not to defeat him. Aizawa would just nod his head, saying, "Okay? I mean, that's kind of confusing, but I'll make sure not to do anything stupid with that kid," Aizawa would say, as he would end up jumping down to defeating many of the villains. As all of this would end up being happening, Izuku would see the villains go down, just being defeated one by one around him, as all of a sudden, Vlad King and Aizawa were pretending to circle Izuku, as Izuku would lift his arms up, yelling that he surrenders before running off into the near distance, just to go hide somewhere, as Shigaraki would then just facepalm. Oh my gosh. These idiots. They couldn't do a simple job right, Shigaraki would say before motioning for Kirogiri to open up a portal. Meanwhile, Izuku had rushed off into the flood zone, as he would end up seeing many of his classmates and Class 1A students surrounded by villains in the water. As Izuku would end up seeing Todoroki just standing on the boat as well, as Izuku would grab a rock before throwing it at the surprised Todoroki. As it would donk Todoroki right on the head, he would start to hold it before looking down at the rock. There was a paper around it. He would look down onto the paper before he would say, Use your ice, idiot." As all of a sudden a light bulb would go off inside Todoroki's head. "Oh yeah, my ice," as Todoroki would slam his foot down onto the boat, as ice would then protrude all around it, sending spikes surrounding the perimeter of the boat, just completely decimating the villains beneath them, trapping them in ice, as Todoroki would then form a path for the rest of the students trapped on the boat with him to go down on to where it was. Izuku would end up walking off to meet Todoroki, as some of the students there would end up being prepared. Many of them had seen Izuku in his Plague Doctor outfit, however they had sort of forgotten about it, and he did look quite villain-like, and so acting on impulse, many of them would get into a stance as they would start to shake, wondering if this was going to be their first real fight with villains. As Izuku would say, "Calm down, don't you guys remember? It's me. I'm in Class 1B. Oh, I guess you're right." As Izuku would be saying this, they would end up going around to each different type of zone and saving as many people as they possibly could. Going around as Izuku would use his questioning abilities to just decimate all of the villains with the help of Todoroki, and the people that they would end up collecting on their way. As they would make it back to just the middle, they would end up seeing the Nomu screeching out a victory screech, as all of the students would end up seeing their two teachers lying on the ground with a pool of blood surrounding them. The Nomu had completely destroyed them, as Izuku would look on in complete and just utter shock. The Nomu had just... It looked to be like they killed their their teachers. How? They never thought something like this could happen. They never thought something so happy could all of a sudden just turn into something so dark and evil. As Izuku would tell them their only hope is to probably rush the Nomu all at once, as many of them would nod their heads. As Todoroki would freeze the Nomu's feet in place, all of them would jump out of nowhere before trying to tackle the Nomu. However, the Nomu would jump up, yelling a screech, sending all of them flying back. As Izuku, who decided to stay in the background, would end up seeing all of this happen. Izuku would end up trying to question the Nomu, asking it sort of different questions. However, it wouldn't answer to a single one of them. It was completely brainless. As Izuku would see the brain on top of it, however, and he knew that his questions weren't probably being heard. He didn't see a singular ear on it at all. So, with that, Izuku would end up looking around the Nomu, just searching for something, a way that the Nomu could hear it, or the Nomu could hear his questioning. However, it couldn't. There were no ears. The only way it would hear was via a special communicator that only Shigaraki had. And so Izuku would end up rushing in, deciding that it's best to just try to stab it, having gotten out his last resort being a knife that he had hid in his pants, as he would jump up before going in and stabbing the Nomu directly into the brain. However, before the knife could reach it, it would stop centimeters away, as the Nomu's massive hand would now be gripping Izuku's neck, choking him out. As Izuku would look directly on towards the Nomu would see Izuku's bird mask, as the Nomu would all of a sudden drop Izuku, as if recognizing who Izuku was, as if knowing that Izuku was sort of a Nomu too. Shigaraki would be yelling at the Nomu to defeat Izuku and kill him. He had him in his grasp. However, the Nomu just couldn't do it. Izuku was a brother towards him, at least he looked like it. He looked almost exactly like a Nomu, just shorter, but with the Plague Doctor outfit. It was the mask and beak that was throwing the Nomu off. He just couldn't understand. And so, with Shigaraki throwing a hissy fit, All Might would end up smashing down the doors, and would end up seeing Class 1A and Class 1B scattered around, all groaning in pain, with cuts and scrapes all around them, as All Might would end up exploding off directly on towards the Nomu, however not before going to punch Izuku. However, Izuku would narrowly dodge it, with his just arms and legs looking like a C. Come on, All Might, don't you remember me? Stop trying with those punches. It's really not fun to get hit by one of those. I've never been hit, and I don't plan on it, Izuku would say, pleading with All Might, as All Might would just say, okay? He had pretty much forgotten about Izuku in his anger, so he was now focusing directly on towards the Nomu, as he would go on with a war cry before exploding off towards the Nomu, going blow for blow and punch for punch with the Nomu. All Might would end up going beyond 100%, just with pure anger. He had wanted to save his students so badly, as he would end up punching the Nomu just repeatedly in its stomach until it would explode off into the horizon, sending glass shards flying onto the ground, as Shigaraki would yell this wasn't going to be the last he had seen of him, and that he's going to see the last just moments of All Might's life just to let go of his grasp, and that he's going to see his eyes fade into colorlessness and emotionlessness. He's going to see the day that All Might's dead. All Might would just look on towards Shigaraki as he would end up being falling through the portal, still yelling at All Might, as All Might would end up calling ambulances and UA security to come rushing down, as they would end up packing all the villains away before rushing all of the students off towards the infirmary, as Izuku would be released early, having been checked by recovery girls being one of the only people that were able to walk on their own. Izuku had basically no injuries at all, besides a couple of bruises around his neck from when the Nomu had grabbed it so hard. As Izuku would be walking out, the next day would end up passing. Izuku would go in to greet many of his classmates, along with Class 1A, wishing them a just hope that they get better soon. As he would end up walking in, he would end up seeing a familiar face standing before him, as he would end up greeting her. "Oh, Lisa, it's nice to see you. I guess you did get an internship here at UA. Well, since he had a healing quirk, UA decided to just contact me and my family, so I guess I'm helping your classmates now. This is kind of cool. Maybe I'll even transfer here and get some more experience." As Izuku would nod his head before just saying, "That kind of implies that you like all of these people being hurt. It wasn't really the best form of wording, you know." Lisa would just sort of awkwardly laugh before saying, "Yeah, I guess it wasn't really the best wording on my part, but oh well, I'm still helping many of them get better though. So anyway, what have you been doing, Izuku?" "Well, I've just been coming to visit them, since I really didn't get hurt since I decided to actually stay back. Actually sounds kind of cowardly, but I almost did get killed by the Nomu, so that was a certain thing too." "The Nomu?" Yeah, it was, a robot that malfunctioned, yeah," Izuku would say, nodding his head, as he had been told repeatedly by Recovery Girl not to share any details about the villain attack, as all that the people had heard was that it was a robot that had been just hacked by someone and it had malfunctioned. So Izuku would end up walking off after greeting some of his classmates that were awake before going off back to his house. He had been given a month off to train and study for the UA Sports Festival. Izuku would jump out of his bed, as today was the day that the UA Sports Festival would be taking place. He would rush over to his closet, just launching the two doors open, looking on as he would grab his uniform, putting it on as he would then rush off towards the school. He didn't want to be late, as he had been told the day prior that if anyone was late, they wouldn't be participating. So as Izuku would make it there, he would end up being seated down, as he would end up just being talking with some of his friends, just asking them and wishing them luck about it, just wondering what they're going to be doing for the two other events. Some of them had forgotten the training they had done against Class 1A, however Izuku would bring up that the final event was going to be a 1v1 tournament. Many of them would nod their heads just in agreement, saying, "Yeah, we've practiced for this, and if I don't forget, you did make it to the finale of that, and you even forfeited, you didn't even fight in it. So I'd say, Izuku, you actually have quite a good chance of winning this." Izuku would nod his head, saying, "Yeah, I guess I do." As he would be saying this, he would end up seeing their teacher walk in before wishing them all good luck. "I'm not going to be able to speak with you once you go into the locker room/waiting room, so I'd like to just wish you all luck now. And one last time once you get off the bus and go into the locker rooms, waiting rooms, whatever," Vladking would say, as they would all walk off and grabbing their UA Sports Festival uniforms, a newer edition of the PE uniforms, however, specifically designed for the UA Sports Festival. So as all of them would be walking off towards where the bus bay was, Izuku would end up walking onto it, sitting down. "So Izuku, why don't you want to tell anyone what your quirk is?" "Well, it's really about just being the moment, I guess. If my quirk is kept a secret, and it never gets out to the villains, then they'll have no clue who I am, or any clue what my quirk could possibly be. So they would have no idea what to do if I were to encounter them. You see, I never understood why people like All Might and Endeavor wanted to be number one so badly. I don't get why you should always want to be in the spotlight so much. I just never got it. I always wanted to just be lesser back and not have to deal with all the paparazzi and media covering me, yeah, my every move. And if I do something wrong considered by the media, that I'll just be flagged up and flared by it for 24/7 until it ends up just blowing over by another controversy. I never wanted to have to deal with that. I never wanted to my own family be stalked by people just wanting to get to be able to say a couple of words to me. That's why I really don't want anyone to know my quirk. Because I'm not going to be a very flashy hero. I might not even be a ranked hero, to be honest with you. I honestly couldn't care less. As long as I'm saving people, I'm saving people. It doesn't matter what my hero rank is. Many of Class 1B would nod, as some of them would even say that Izuku was honorable, as the bus would pull up, dropping them off in a special drop-off zone, specially designed for the classes to go off into the waiting room to get changed. As they would all walk off, getting changed in their respective locker rooms, as they would then be funneled in to the waiting room. Izuku would be seated down, as they would then be told to go off. As the doors would end up opening, they would then go off onto the field to some cheers, but not as much as Class 1A would receive, as just moments later, Class 1A's doors would open, as the crowd would erupt in cheers, as the cheers would echo around, bouncing off the sides of the Coliseum, as Class 1A would smile directly on towards the entirety of just the building and Coliseum, as this was the most attention they had ever gotten, and many of them liked this such attention. So with Smiling Midnight would then ask for the first-year representative to walk up and give a speech, as Izuku would end up hearing Bakugo Katsuki walk up before calmly gazing onto the crowd. "I'm gonna win," Bakugo would say calmly before stepping down from the mic, as the crowd would then boo along with many of the students, while Izuku would put his hand out as if stopping his class from booing them, as Midnight would instantly rush on and say, "Oh, well, why don't we get started with the first event, which just happens to be a race, as we'll have some of our faithful hero volunteers take you off to where that race is going to be held. And we'll explain later while you're in sort of the starting line." Izuku would end up glancing off towards Kendo before telling her that she needs to win against Bakugo Katsuki. She would wonder what Izuku meant by this, however, Izuku wouldn't elaborate on what he had told her. As Izuku would walk off, he would end up being just situated in this hallway along with the rest of these first year of UA, as they would all just be seen there wondering what was going to happen. So there's going to be 3 different types of obstacles: an army of robots that you had to defeat in the entrance exam, a cavern where you have to hop from rock to rock, and if you fall, you're eliminated as well, and you can't get back in unless you are somehow able to scale up the rocks, and a minefield. I'd be very careful about not stepping on any mines. So, let's begin. As all of a sudden, the doors would start to slowly come to an opening, as Izuku would see all of the students start to push and crowd around the entrance. As Izuku would be seeing this, Izuku would finally be pushed out, seeing the trampling stampede just exploding off towards the just massive army of robots, as Izuku would be walking behind everyone, as it was just complete chaos. It looked like an utter destruction from war. Everything had just been destroyed behind Izuku. As Izuku, still walking, now in last place, would all of the robots just be decimated in front of him. As Izuku, seeing this, would finally just decide to run off. He decided not to deal with all of the robots, thinking that it wasn't really worth his time. And sure enough, he'd be right, quickly using his speed to catch up with many of the other people that were hanging around at the back. Izuku would easily hop from rock to rock, as it was such ease. During some of Izuku's agility training, Izuku had worked with hopping and holding on to small ledges, while also hopping very quickly in far, far distances. And so with that, Izuku was easily able to scale it, quickly catching up with all of the people that were now on to the minefield. As Izuku would be seeing this, he would end up having a spare robot part that he had actually taken. Much like in canon, Izuku would start to pile up tons of these mines on the ground as he would end up rushing up to it, slamming the piece onto the ground. With a rope in hand, Izuku would explode off with his 2 feet on the bottom of this robot piece, as Izuku would then just be sent flying through the dirt, riding it like a surfboard through it. As it would carve its way and carve its path through the minefield, it would end up getting Izuku last place, or the last finishing place that would make it on to the second round, as Izuku would end up smiling, beating out some of even his own class that were just about to make it. Izuku would end up thinking, oh, man, that was too close to call. Man, I almost didn't make it. Man, that's kind of stressful to think about, Izuku would say, just sort of awkwardly laughing. As he had decided to walk, and had even been shown over just the massive Jumbotron, how Izuku had decided not to even pay any attention and run during the first part of it, and many people just disregarded Izuku, thinking that he wasn't even going to make it past and probably even get last place with him walking. However, they were much mistaken. He did get last place in something, however, last finishing place. So as Izuku would be sitting there, he would end up stretching in the waiting room. The next match had just not been announced yet, as all of them would end up walking back onto the field after a 10-minute break period to give everyone the rest that they needed. Alright! All of the people that had made it on, and all of the students that had made it on to the next round. This round's going to be known as the Cavalry Battle. So, this is how it's going to work. There's going to be teams of 4. So, depending on your place, you are going to get a headband. If, say, you got first place, you are going to get a 10 million point headband. But if you got last, you're going to get a 1 point headband. And so, now the person on top of your team is going to be wearing the headband, whether it's around their head or neck. And the 3 people are going to be carrying them above them, as that's basically what's going to happen. So that's the cavalry battle for you. So, I'll give you all 5 minutes to make your teams. As all of this would be happening, Izuku would end up walking around, just gathering some of the few people from his class, as he would end up gathering Mushroom Girl, as he would call her, Itsuka Kendo, and just another random person from the crowd that had made it on. As Izuku would do this, he would end up just seeing that their combined point totals just had gathered them around 100 points. They were going to have to scavenge throughout many of the other people to get the enough points to end up passing. As Izuku would be doing this, the match and cavalry battle would end up beginning, as everyone Izuku would see around them would all focus their attention and gaze on to Bakugo Katsuki's team. He had gotten first place, and now he was the main target for everyone to get that 10 million point headband. Izuku would just shake his head, saying, "Oh, those fools," he would say. As Itsuka Kendo, on top, being the team leader, would end up looking on towards Izuku, asking him what he meant. "They're all going off towards Bakugo. That basically leaves them open, as they're not expecting an attack from others. So why don't we go off and pick off some of easy ones not really paying attention?" Kendo would smile on towards Izuku, saying, "Yeah, I guess that'd actually work." As they would all just start to explode off, looking for any people not paying attention, as they would end up grabbing some of the loosely tied headbands around some people's necks and just other parts of their body, grabbing it and yanking it off of them before Izuku Kendo would end up tying it around herself as well. Many of them being so caught up in the hype and just trying to get Bakugo, they wouldn't even realize their headband was gone, and those few that had realized it would end up being clapped by Kendo's massive hands, as it would just be slammed into the ground by a quick swipe from her hand. So as all of this would end up happening, they would scrum together a sum total of around 401 points, just barely enough, 10 points out from fourth place, the last qualifying place they could have made, as they would all just smile in excitement as they had all made it on towards the next round. As Izuku and the rest of the people who had made it would walk back to the waiting room as a 20-minute break period had begun, Izuku would walk up to Kendo before patting her on the back. "Good job, Kendo. Good luck against Katsuki Bakugo. You better not lose against him." Kendo would again be confused before asking Izuku what he meant by this, as Izuku would just smile, saying that she'll see. As all of this would end up happening, Izuku would end up being told that he was going to be first up against someone named Shinso. Izuku would hear that his match was against one called Toshi Shinso, as he would end up hearing that it was the last person from the General Studies course that was still in the sports festival. Izuku would nod his head as he would end up walking out onto the arena, as Shinso would end up trying to brainwash him as soon as the match began, spitting out random things and just all different types of things, trying to get Izuku to answer him. However, Izuku wouldn't budge, just walking completely on towards Shinso, and as soon as Izuku got into arm's length of Shinso, Shinso would start to attack, not wanting to just be standing there doing nothing, looking like a complete idiot. As he would start to throw loose punches that really had no power behind him, Izuku would plant his foot before winding his fist back, making all of his hands clenched together as he would punch Shinso across the cheek, as Shinso would be sent flying, rocking Shinso's entire body back from the incomplete power that Izuku's punch had behold upon him, as Izuku would then punch him even more, as it just looked like a complete blowout, as Izuku would finally push Shinso back, as he would start to fall out as a ring-out victory, stepping one foot back onto the grass below him. As Shinso would sigh, knowing that he probably didn't do well enough to make it on to one of the hero courses, Izuku would say, "I'm sorry I had to do it to you like that, Shinso. I wish you good luck in trying to make it on to one of the hero courses. I've heard what you've been trying to do. Maybe I'll even have a talk with Nezu and see if I can even maybe get you into Class 1A. As Shinso would look on towards Izuku before seeing Izuku just disappear. He had already walked back off into the waiting room, as Shinso had just been confused by his entire interaction with Izuku Midoriya. With Izuku now back in the waiting room, the people or his classmates who had made it on to the next round would congratulate Izuku on his victory. "Congratulations, Izuku," Kendo would say. Izuku would smile on towards her before thanking her for congratulating him, as the next match would end up being announced. It was her match against someone known as Ida. She would end up walking out onto the field as her match would end up beginning. Ida would explode off using his engine quirk to rush Kendo. However, Ida and Kendo had fought before in the 1v1 practice, and Kendo had actually come out victorious. So, with Ida knowing what Kendo's strategy was possibly going to be, because of that practice, he would end up just making all of his moves unpredictable, hopping around, exploding off towards her. However, this would just completely just blow up in his face, as his unpredicted moves had caused his balance to start to fall off towards the edge, as he had gotten himself way too close, as his foot would end up getting on to a loose piece of the concrete that had been made from a prior match. He would end up slipping down, as Kendo would jump in, pushing him back with her big hands, causing Ida to end up falling down backwards as a ring-out victory. As Izuku's next match would end up being announced after a couple matches would end up passing. It was going to be Izuku versus a kid named Mineta. Izuku hadn't seen much combat from Mineta, as he really hadn't even paid attention to the little grape boy. So as the match would begin, Mineta would start frantically throwing his tiny purple grape-looking orbs directly on towards Izuku. However, Izuku had been told by one of his classmates that Mineta Kid's quirk is called some type of sticky thing, and if you touch it, you're stuck to it, so I suggest not touching any of those things. Izuku would nod his head, dodging all of the orbs around Mineta, as Izuku would end up walking up to him. "So I've heard what you've been doing to some of the girls in Class 1A and even my Class 1B. Maybe I should teach you a lesson that will stop you from being such an idiot," Izuku would say, as his hand now completely grabbing on to Mineta's, now stuck to Mineta because of his head. As Izuku would be lifting him up now, not even gripping him, Izuku would then put his hand out as far as he possibly could before winding his foot back in a kicking motion, as Izuku would then launch his foot forward directly in between Mineta's legs, kicking him right into Mineta's just area, as Mineta would end up falling, releasing Izuku from his sticky orb's grip, falling down, holding on to just his between his legs, just rolling around as the entire crowd, or a lot of them would just say, "Ooh," just knowing what Izuku had done to him, as Izuku would slowly just roll Mineta out of the arena, basically just humiliating him in tons of thousands of people. As Kendo's next match would end up beginning, it was her against someone called Uchako Uraraka. She had managed to beat Kaminari in her prior match, so now she was going to be up against Kendo. As all of this would end up happening, the match would end up beginning, as Uraraka would rush off towards her, knowing that if she were to get her hand on her, she would automatically basically be given the victory. So with her trying to do this, however, Kendo would end up expanding her hand before grabbing Uraraka immediately, causing this just to be a victory immediately for Kendo, as Uraraka wouldn't be able to move at all from the tight grip that Kendo had on her. As all of this would be happening, with that, the semifinals would be announced: Shoto Todoroki versus Bakugo Katsuki, and Izuku Midoriya versus Itsuka Kendo. As all of this would be happening, Izuku would end up watching the first semifinals match start: Bakugo Katsuki versus Todoroki Shoto. As all of this would be happening, the match would start with Todoroki sending a massive iceberg directly on towards Bakugo, who would just slam his explosions into it, as this would continue on going, with Bakugo yelling at Todoroki, "Why don't you use your fire, you half-and-half bastard? Come on, I'm not weak," as Todoroki would continue on, just sending waves upon waves of icebergs barreling on towards Bakugo. However, this would just seem futile, as it wouldn't work, as Todoroki would continually be advanced by Bakugo until finally Bakugo was up in Todoroki's face, sending an explosion barreling down towards him, as Todoroki would look on in his imminent doom just barreling on directly at him. He would accept his fate, as he would be just exploded by one of Bakugo's explosions, as he would be sent flying out of the arena, slammed into the padded walls, as Endeavor would say, "No! How could you lose, Todoroki? Why didn't you use your fire?" As Bakugo would be equally upset as Endeavor, agreeing with him, saying, "Yeah, come on, why didn't you use your fire, half and half?" However, that wouldn't really work, with Bakugo having to be pulled out and back into the waiting room, with Todoroki being sent to the infirmary. With the next match beginning, Bakugo would end up meeting Izuku in the hallway before Izuku would be able to walk out onto the arena. "I swear to God, Izuku, you better not lose this fight," Bakugo would say, as Izuku would just smile before shrugging off Bakugo. "Oh, don't worry, Bakugo, I won't lose," Izuku would say on towards Bakugo with a weird-looking smirk, as Izuku would walk onto the arena as the match would begin. Izuku would rush off towards Kendo with a punch position in his hand, about to punch her. However, Izuku would stop the punch inches away from Kendo, who had reacted by trying to grab Izuku's hand. You better not lose this fight, Kendo. And almost immediately, Izuku would raise his hand, saying that he forfeits the match, as almost immediately an audible just gasp would be heard echoing around the arena. What? Why would you forfeit? Izuku would just sort of laugh. Well, fame really ain't my thing, so I don't really want this many people seeing my quirk in action, and I don't think I could beat you in combat without using my quirk. So I decided just to stop this fight. Good luck with Bakugo. Like I said, you better not lose to him, Izuku would say before walking off directly on towards the stands to watch the final match begin. As this would be happening, Izuku's class would all just surround him, asking him endless questions. Why would you do that, Izuku? Why? Izuku would just smirk, saying that they heard me. You all heard what I said to Kendo, didn't you? Everyone did. There's microphones all around so you can hear any talking. I told you I don't want all these people seeing what my quirk is. And so, with Izuku having said all of this, many of the viewers onward would end up wondering what Izuku's quirk was. The mystery would end up just being shared by many of the people surrounding in the Colosseum. So, as the final fight would begin, Kendo would be seen standing in front of Bakugo Katsuki, as Midnight would raise her hand up before finally sending it flying down, signifying that the match had begun. As Bakugo would explode off in anger towards Kendo, however, Kendo would see Bakugo's anger and arrogance. Knowing that Bakugo was bound to do something stupid, acting completely on rage, she would start to use her quick feet and just dodge all of Bakugo's quick attacks. Bakugo had no skill or strategy at all behind his attacks. He was still quite angry that Izuku had decided to forfeit and that he wasn't going to be able to go against Izuku and finally show that he was better than him. So Bakugo would end up just flying off towards Kendo, trying in all of his might to just send a massive explosion towards him, as if, or her, to send a message. However, this would just not work at all, as Kendo would continually on-dodge, as Bakugo would get more and more tired, as Kendo would finally rear her hand back before both of her hands would be to her side, as she would slam both of her hands directly onto Bakugo before gripping him tightly, as Bakugo's complete body on both of his sides would be now red. She would end up holding him tightly until he would end up passing out from the lack of oxygen. As she would release her tight grip, she would then be awarded the first place. And Izuku Kendo of Class 1B is the winner of Orway Sports Festival for the first years. As the crowd would erupt in cheers, as everyone had thought it was the biggest upset they had ever seen. Someone from Class 1B had managed to defeat someone from Class 1A? That's absurd. As many of the students would rush down to just greet Kendo, however, they would be stopped as the medal awarding ceremony would end up starting, with her up top and Bakugo being tightly restrained on the bottom, and Todoroki having gotten third would end up being happening there, as Kendo would receive her gold medal, as she would end up walking off to where her class was located. Well, Izuku, I guess I didn't mess up for you. Izuku would then smile, saying, well, I guess you didn't mess up. Great job, he would say, before walking off, as the rest of the class would give just all of the things that they had said towards her. They had always wondered what caused Izuku to forfeit. Maybe Izuku had said it to one of his best friends in Class 1B, Izuku Kendo. However, Kendo had nothing to give either. She was still quite confused on the whole thing as well. However, she did say that Izuku, before the match or the sports festival had even begun, he had told her that she needs to win against Bakugo Katsuki. And so she was still quite confused on it herself. And so, with all of that ending, they would then be transferred back to the main UA school building, where they would then be told will be taking UA internships. However, before then, there's a select few students that need to talk with the principal for very important matters that are very confidential. Many of them would to know what this talk was going to be. However, Izuku thought he knew the exact reason. However, before this, he would end up having to choose a person that he was going to internship with. Scrolling down the very short list, since Izuku didn't use his quirk at all, he would end up finding someone by the name of Shota Aizawa, which happened just to be the Class 1A hero teacher. Izuku would smile before selecting that, turning in his paper before walking off towards Nezu's office, as the 3 people that Vlad King had said were going to be there, as only 2 of those people happened to be in the class. Izuku would be walking off towards the class as he would end up seeing Kendo and the other person sitting there in there as well. So Nezu, I imagine I know what this conversation happens to be about. Well, I'm guessing you do too, Izuku. So anyway, you 3 performed quite well in the sports festival. It was quite surprising to see you, Shinso, make it into the final fight against you. However, you do need to catch up on your training. So, I'd like to tell you all that you all have the opportunity to be moved up into Class 1A. I know both Izuku and Kendo know how to be heroes, and so make great heroes in Class 1A, so I know they'll thrive in it. However, Shinso, it all depends on what Aizawa says about you, since you are going to be taking a hero internship with Izuku and Aizawa. I recently received word that Izuku will be there too. So, hopefully you both don't die with Aizawa as your teacher, or your internship person, I guess, for the next couple of weeks. Well, good luck, I say to you, as they would then be dismissed to go off and grab their hero costumes and then travel to wherever the hero agency that they would be internshipping at was. As Izuku and Shinso, all they had to do was just get their hero costume. However, Shinso didn't have one. Remember, he was in a general's course, so he would have to wait as he would be just describing what his costume would be and any sort of things that could possibly help boost Shinso's experience and just level of capability against people with better quirks than him, or powerful quirks. So he would end up coming up with a voice modulator that would cause his voice to just being changed with different things. Izuku would end up asking for one as well, or for one that he could put under his Plague Doctor outfit. So both Hatsume and the rest of the support course would end up coming up just in luck within just a few hours after they would ask for it, since they pretty much had nothing else to do. So with that done, they would then walk over to see that Aizawa was waiting for them. So the first bit of internship, I've decided both of you are worthy of wielding my scarf here, he would say before showing both of them how it was used. I don't believe either of you have seen how it's been used before, so I guess I'll show you some examples, as Aizawa would then show them how exactly it would end up being used. As Izuku would see this, he would end up wondering something. That seems like it could be quite useful, huh? Izuku would say, as Aizawa would say, yeah, it is quite useful. That's pretty much what we're going to be working on. So, let's get started with the basic training. Over the next couple of weeks, both Izuku and Shinso would start to train with Aizawa's scarf, as they wouldn't really get it right on the first time. Aizawa would tell them that it's okay to get it wrong, as he hadn't gotten it right for over 3 years. It took him many years to master his scarf. So they would just nod their heads with Aizawa, knowing not they shouldn't be frustrated, but rather just happy that they have the opportunity to be training under someone as skilled as Aizawa. Aizawa would also give them mini lessons in acrobatics and other sorts of things, which Izuku would prove to be quite good at. He had been training his acrobatics for quite a while, and so he had gotten quite good at it. And so, with that, Izuku would excel with it while Shinso was still getting the hang of it. Finally, after 2 weeks of this training, Aizawa would finally allow them to go out and fight some real villains, which Izuku had been waiting for. As Aizawa would be saying this, he would end up dropping them off in the middle of the city in the middle of the night. As Izuku would tell Shinso that they need to stay close. He's in charge of giving Shinso some other forms of experience. Shinso really has no other type of just experience with any type of fighting. So with that, Izuku and Shinso would be walking around looking for any fighting, as Izuku would end up just hearing a yell out in pain just from a couple blocks down. As Izuku would rush, Shinso would struggle to keep up, as finally Izuku would turn around a corner as he would then see an alleyway drenched in blood. Izuku would look around as he would see a body of a slumped hero slumped against the wall, as he would then see a shiny yellow or a shiny suit of armor laying down against the ground, as he would look up at Izuku before saying, "No! Get out of here! Get out of here before he kills you!" As the person standing before Izuku and Shinso just happened to be the hero killer Stain. "Oh, is it more to other types of heroes?" "Oh, it's just two villains, huh? I wonder why that hero in training was telling you to get out of here. Well, why don't you two shoo? You have no business here." Izuku, however, wouldn't shoo, knowing that his costume had played right into the hands of himself. Stain had thought he was a villain. "Oh, you're Stain, the hero killer. That's pretty cool. I never thought I'd run into you," Izuku would say, playing the part. Shinso would look on, kind of confused at Izuku. However, Izuku would elbow Shinso, as if motioning for him to play on as well. "I've been quite the big fan of your work, Stain. Do you mind answering me a question? Do you know what your name is?" "You don't need to know that. I don't want no villain or any other type of person spreading my name throughout. That could cause me to get captured. Who do you think I am?" Izuku would smirk under his mask, as he would then sort of laugh. "Oh, Stain, if only you weren't such a fool." Stain would be confused at what Izuku was talking about, as just moments prior, he had been praised by Izuku. As all of a sudden, Stain would start to feel a sharp pain all throughout his body, as all of a sudden a crack would be heard, as Stain would come tumbling down, as all four of his limbs had completely been broken. As Stain would just now feel an emptiness as he couldn't move, only barely being able to wiggle his body back and forth. As Izuku would call the police, they would end up rushing onto the scene, as they would end up seeing Shinso and Izuku before saying, "Put your hands in the air!" As both Shinso and Izuku would do so, Aizawa would jump down from the ground. "Trust me, they're heroes. They may not look the part, but they really are." The police would say, "And you are..." Jeez. "I guess I really am quite unwell known. Can't believe you all don't know me. You knew to being cops." Yeah, they would say, kind of confused at what Aizawa was talking about. "Well, I'm Shotai's, well, I'm Eraserhead. I'm one of the heroes that stroll these parts during the night. So if you see these other two, they're with me. And they're not villains," Aizawa would say before showing them his hero card. As they would nod, they would put Stain in the back of their cop car, as it would then drive off with an ambulance shortly there behind him to gather up Native and the person below him. "Ida, what made you go out and act such on impulse? You all have been taught about not to act out like this. I'm ashamed of this. Hopefully this serves as a lesson for you. Not to act out on pure revenge and arrogance," Aizawa would say at the boy who's now crying beneath his suit, not sure if he'd ever become the hero that he promised his brother and family he'd become, and he was scared he'd become much like his brother. So with all of that happening, the week would end up passing as Izuku and all of Itsuka Kenda and Shinso would walk in to Nezu's office. "Well, it appears I've gotten good word from all two of the people you've done internships with. So I guess you know what that means. all three of you will be moved up into the hero program. And the hero program being Class 1A, of course. Congratulations. Sadly, though, three people are going to have to be moved down. So I'll have someone go and be told that they're being moved down. And those three people are Mineta, I think Kota, and one other one. I can't think of the name right now. I'll think of it eventually. But, oh well, they'll still be in Class 1B, so they'll still have just as great of a chance as making it in to the hero program, or making it as a hero, of course. As all three would walk over to the class, who would tell them the news, as you would walk into Class 1A to get the bad news to the three that had been moved down. Well, guys, we've actually been moved up to Class 1A, we'll probably still be seeing you, but we won't be teammates anymore. We'll probably be enemies, as the fact that Izuku was going to be their enemy kind of sent shivers down everyone's spine. They didn't want to have to deal with Izuku at all. The shenanigans that Izuku had gotten all of them into, they just didn't want to deal with it. And for the most part, many of them were scared of Izuku too. So with that, Izuku would just be sent to Class 1A along with Itsuka Kendo and Shinso, as they would all be seated in class, taking the former seats of the people that they had moved out. Izuku having taken the seat of Mineta, who would end up being just thanked by many of the other girls in Class 1A for moving down that heinous child out of this fateful class. As a couple of weeks would end up passing, as all of them would be told that finals were upon them. They were finally about to take the midterm final exams. It's going to be about half as bad as what finals are going to be. So with that, they would be told they are going to be versing up against a certain hero, which will happen to be a random teacher. It's not going to be no Class 1A versus Class 1B sort of thing. However, this is going to determine whether you are going to be taking part in a summer school or you're going to be taking part in our summer training camp program. So I suggest passing this and not failing, Aisawa would say, as he would end up bringing all of them on where they would end up taking the written exam. It was quite the hard written exam, however, Izuku actually would pass it quite easily. Remember being studying with Nezu, he would easily pass through this massive pile of paper all within an hour. They had 12 hours to complete these massive stacks of papers, too. And so, with that, Izuku passing through it within an hour made everyone sort of jealous that Izuku now had the rest of the day to go do whatever he wanted. This was UA, of course. It may seem harsh to give them a 12-hour exam. However, you should expect no less from heroes, as many of the papers had to do with strategies and other sorts of things, as they couldn't just have people not know these things, because maybe you're going to need the projectile force and just how fast the bullet travels. Maybe you'll have to deal with something like that when you're a hero. So with all of that happening, many of them would pass this exam while many of them would fail. However, those people who failed still had a chance of redemption. It was going to be the hero aspect of their final exam. And so, with that final exam being told, they would end up having their teams made. It was going to be Izuku and Bakugo versus All Might, much like in canon, with the other teams being just so-and-so, with Mineta and the people like Shinso taking the place of others, being taking the place of the people that they had moved down to Class 1B. So, with the matches announced, everyone would know that Izuku and Bakugo were probably going to go last as a grand finale, since they were going to be going up against All Might, of course. So, their thing that they predicted would end up actually being true. Their match would be said to be last, as their all matches would come before it. Once everyone had either passed or failed, it was finally time for Izuku and Bakugo's match to commence. As all of them, or both of them, were sitting there, Izuku would try to create a plan with Bakugo. However, Bakugo, being arrogant, wouldn't care, brushing off Izuku, saying that he's going to defeat All Might on his own. As the match would begin, Izuku would end up seeing All Might just jump off in the distance as Izuku would disappear into the shadows, waiting for All Might to pounce as Izuku would see Bakugo just standing out in the middle of the open, challenging All Might to a fight, and sure enough, almost immediately Bakugo would be knocked out by a flailing fist from All Might himself. So with Bakugo now knocked out, Izuku will decide to play a little game on All Might. "Hey All Might," all of a sudden Bakugo's voice would say, "Hey All Might, do you mind answering a question for me?" All Might would be in shock, looking down at the unconscious body of Bakugo Katsuki. He would be just in shock. "What's 1 + 1? The voice would say as All Might would just say, "What the? How are you talking? You're unconscious. What type of sick joke is this?" All Might would say, as Bakugo's voice would then say wrong in a teasing manner, as all of a sudden All Might would then feel a sharp pain go all throughout his body, chest area. The answer was quite simple, that almost everyone should know it, and so it had a severe problem and backfire to it. The punishment had just completely broken all of All Might's bones, as that punishment had been up there with some of Izuku's favorites. However, he hadn't got the opportunity to use a lot of his other most favorite ones, as he had actually been told by Aizawa not to use any illness or disease related ones while in UA. So since he couldn't do that, which was his Plague Doctor outfit was based off of, he had to go with the broken bones just to ladder. So Izuku doing that would easily just crush All Might's legs and arms as his body would fall down, as Izuku would look on to one of the many cameras asking, "Is that just the finish?" tying around some of the capture rope, as Izuku would then tap All Might on the head as all of that would be done. However, that would only be after Izuku would end up hearing that the match was finished. Many of Izuku's classmates would look on in complete shock as Izuku would be walking back. "How did you do that? You managed to beat All Might." "Oh, please, I'm sure he wasn't trying his hardest. I don't think I really could beat All Might at 100% of his full potential," Izuku would say. As all of them would walk back, however, All Might would end up stopping Izuku once the rest of Class 1A had left back to their houses. "You know, Izuku, I have something I'm meaning to tell you. You seem like you're a worthy successor to my Quirk, one for all." As All Might would start to explain it, Izuku would shake his head calmly. "I'm sorry, All Might, I can't do that." "You what?" "I've heard about one for all from Nezu, and I've known you've been searching for a successor for quite a while, and I simply just don't think I could be a successor. Like I've said before, I just don't think I could handle being in the spotlight. It's something I don't like. Plus, the quirk I have now, it's actually basically meant on being hidden and no one's known about it. And so if I were to have another flashy quirk like yours, everyone would end up realizing what my other quirk would be. I wouldn't be able to use it in surprise because everyone would know who I am and my strategies. And I wouldn't just be able to go in guns blazing about to destroy someone with a singular punch. I just don't think I'd be able to do that, as I like relying on skill to beat my opponents, especially in the art of surprise. So I'm sorry, All Might, I can't do that. However, I do have another candidate, which I'm sure you've heard of before. His name's Mirio, in the 3rd year section. I suppose you should give him a try. He'd make a great candidate as your successor." All Might would nod his head in just understanding what Izuku had said before walking off, as All Might to end up contemplating what he had just said. He didn't want my quirk. That's an opportunity almost anyone would suggest, Izuku would say, or All Might would say to himself, as Izuku would end up being told that all of the people in his class, along with Class 1B, his former class, would be going up into the mountains for the summer training camp in just around 2 weeks. So after those 2 weeks would pass, all of them would walk into UA with a bag of clothes that they were to wear over a 2-month time period. They had been told to bring a week's worth of clothes and that they are going to have a wash day every week on Sunday to wash all of their excess clothes that had become dirty. So with that, they would all hop onto a bus before just exploding off into the near distance, traveling off towards wherever the mountains had been. Many of them had no clue where they were being taken, however they just knew that hopefully it was going to at least bring them some fun, and they weren't going to be doing all this hard training over a 2-month period. They didn't want it to be like a complete hell for them. However, it was going to be a complete hell for them, as they would end up meeting the wild pussycats up at around the base of the mountain. "Hello, Class 1A and B. We are the wild pussycats, and we're the guardians of this mountain. We're also going to be the ones helping you and excelling your quirks throughout these next couple of months during summer. So, the first bit of training will actually be to make it to the training camp. We're not giving you any hints to which direction it's in. We'll just say it's somewhere up in the mountaintops. You'll also have to avoid, let me see, these monsters made out of dirt. I'd suggest working together as they're quite hard to take down." As all of a sudden a landslide would happen, as they would all fall down to the ground, looking up to see the heroes just looking down onto them, seeing how they had just been out there. "Come on, you have quite the ways to go. If you don't make it back in time for dinner, you're not going to get any, so I suggest hurrying it up," they would say before shooing them off into the near distance, as many of them would rush on, hopefully trying to dodge it. However, Izuku had been strangely absent. Remember his amazing ability to just randomly disappear into the shadows. So with Izuku now in the abyss, he would somehow find his way onto the training camp grounds without any distractions. So with Izuku out there, he would look around before being seated on one of the benches, before placing his head down, deciding that he should probably take a short little nap, waiting for the rest of his class and Class 1B to arrive. A couple hours would pass, as Izuku would end up waking up to see the wild pussycat standing above him along with Aizawa and Flat King. "Well, it appears one of you has somehow made your way here quicker than the others. Congratulations, Izuku Midoriya. I guess you'll receive dinner first," as Izuku would look on to see the massive buffet of food standing on before Izuku, as Izuku would decide that he was hungry that night and would get a massive plate of food, just with it towering over Izuku. It wasn't like towering, however, it was quite a lot of food, and so Izuku stared down on it as it looked quite good. Izuku would chow down into his food, as Izuku would then end up finishing after around 15 to 20 minutes. Once Izuku finished, his class would end up arriving, as he would see their tired expressions, as they would then realize Izuku had been here for hours. "Took you guys long enough. I wondered how you all have been doing, having to run that far distance. I didn't have to deal with all of those distractions. I even asked some of you to come with me, but you all just brushed me off. Maybe you should learn to listen to me. Well, I suggest digging into this food before it's all gone. It's quite good after all," Suk would say, laughing before walking off into the area being shown to where some of the hot springs were, as it had already become nighttime, and so Izuku had decided to just relax for the rest of that night. Along with the class would end up relaxing with Izuku as well once they had finished their dinner. So with that all said and done, Izuku would end up just being heated as the 3 months of training hell would end up beginning, as all of them would be seen being training for hours upon hours every single day, day in and day out, as they even had to prepare their own meals, as nothing came free for them. All of this work they knew was going to give them somewhere. It was going to make them better heroes, and sure enough, it did. As finally the end of the summer training camp would finally come, as all of them would be smiling, knowing that they weren't going to have to deal with such another long, grueling week or day of training. And so they would end up walking out being told that since it's now nighttime and their last day of training had ended, they may now do a hide-and-seek process. So Class 1A is going to just be walking around this forest, trying to just not be scared by Class 1B. I guess that could be quite the adventure, I guess. As all of this would be happening, they would all walk off into the forest, wondering what type of things that was going to happen to them that night. As all of that would be happening, Izuku would start to smell around him. Something just didn't sit right with him. As he would be smelling, he would end up, the burnings of smoke was coming near him. He would look above the tree line and horizon as he would see a burning, blistering blue fire barreling towards Izuku along with the summer camp. As Izuku would rush back, taking the path he came into the forest, he would then reach it as he would see the heroes looking on in complete shock as well. "You all need to go over the speakers and get all the students back here. It's too dangerous for them to be out in the forest like this," Izuku would say as he would end up rushing off, looking for many of his classmates, trying to yell for them to get back. As Izuku would be doing this, he would end up having a striking remembrance. "What about Kota?" Izuku would say, as he would end up rushing off to where Kota's hideout had been. As a couple of months prior to this, Izuku had actually started to befriend Kota, who Izuku actually had been told by some of the trainers there that Kota had pushed everyone away and just seemed overall lonely. So Izuku would try to change that, even trying to befriend him, and slowly over time, Izuku's friendship with Kota would end up growing. And so Izuku, realizing Kota wasn't with the heroes at all, Izuku would rush off to where his hideout was. And sure enough, Izuku would end up finding one standing towering over the young boy, just laughing maniacally. "Oh, if it isn't Kota. You see this?" pointing to his eye patch on his one eye. "Your damn parents happened to do it to me. Their little water Quirk, such a puny Quirk, happened to destroy one of my eyes. Well, I guess I'll get payback. Maybe even the doc will give me your eye as a sort of trophy, I guess." The now massive villain would say, towering over him even further, as muscle would end up growing all around him, making him massiver and massiver. Towering above Kota, Izuku would look on to see the hill and Muscular just staring on, advancing towards him like he was about to kill him. As Izuku would jump in, yelling for him to stop, as Muscular's head would turn towards Izuku. "Oh, what do we have here? Another brat I'm gonna have to crush their skull in. No matter, why don't you come here first? I'll deal with this Kota kid later," Muscular would say before launching himself on towards Izuku, as Izuku would end up jumping out of the way, as Muscular would continue on advancing towards Izuku. As Izuku, having just jumped in there, acting on impulse, not wanting Kota to get hurt at all, knew that this was about to be a tough fight. He couldn't just randomly start to ask Muscular questions, as he was already starting to get out of breath, and so not being able to answer anything while also being jumping and backflipping, trying to dodge all of these attacks, it wasn't going to be a good fight for him. So with all of this happening, he would end up just seeing Muscular running around trying to attack him. With him barely dodging, he would finally gain the breath he could, with Muscular catching his breath as well. "Ah, you little rat! I can't believe you've been able to dodge all of my attacks. No matter, you won't be able to dodge this," Muscular would say before winding his fist back. Whoa, let's settle things down here. Please. No need to get so antsy all of a sudden. So, why don't you tell me about this Kota kid? How do you know him?" All of a sudden, Muscular would stop dead in his tracks. Oh, that kid. His parents. I killed them back a couple of years ago. Anyway, that doesn't matter now. I need to smash your face in, Muscular would say, slamming both of his fists together. Well, you could do that. Or you could answer a few questions for me. So, what happens to be the secret ingredient in KFC's recipe? Izuku would say, just pulling out of nowhere. Muscular would say, why would I know that? All of a sudden, he would end up being pushed back. No, this question was insanely challenging. However, the punishment was insanely soft. It was just a harsh blow of winds, sending Muscular barreling backwards. So this punishment shouldn't have been too hard. However, it made the punishment a hell of a lot worse that there just happened to be a cliff right behind Muscular. So as Muscular would be sent flying back downwards, he would be screaming at Izuku, trying to grip onto some of the ledges, but it would pull no use. As his body would slam into the ground, his dust would fly into the air, his birds would just be sent flying out, not wanting to deal with what could have been below them or being predators. So with that, Izuku would save Koda, bringing him back to where the heroes were, as he would then start to jump around, saving as many people as possible, as he would easily just go through and help as many of his classmates as he possibly could, as he would end up finding his way back to the middle of the forest, where he would end up seeing Bakugo, Katsuki, Todoroki, and a bunch of other of his students surrounding them, as there was a portal with Bakugo, Katsuki, and Tokiyami in some sort of marble-like state from a villain known as Mr. Compress. Let them out, you bastard! How dare you take some of our classmates, Izuku would say, as Mr. Compress would only laugh. Oh, I couldn't care less about what you think. Anyways, Dobby, it's best we get going. Yes, you're right, Mr. Compress. As all of a sudden a portal would open up as they would start to flow through. However, Izuku would ask them, do you mind answering me a couple of questions before you go? What happens to be 1 + 1? However, Izuku had suddenly been able to speed up the time period at which they answered because of the sudden desperation. So, as this was happening, they couldn't answer it, and so the marble would be flipped up out of their hand as a punishment. However, Mr. Compress would reach out and grab one of them, as Izuku would grab the other. With it now shattering in Izuku's hand, Tokiyami would then appear out of nowhere, now just completely unconscious, having been in that marble-like state. No! Damn it! How could I miss one of them? Izuku would say, as Kendo would walk up to him, patting his back, at least saying, well, at least you got one of them. It'd be a whole lot worse if you didn't get any. As Izuku would nod his head, looking up towards Kendo, saying, yeah, I guess you're right. As cop cars, ambulances, and a whole lot of other heroes would end up arriving up in the secret mountaintop base, just bringing all of the students down out of the mountains, taking statements, bringing people to hospital, and all of that, as they all would just be so confused about what had just happened. Later that night, Momo would end up being brought into a conference room with many other heroes. So, Momo Yaoyorozu, do you mind telling these heroes what you've told me earlier? Oh, yes. I actually, was able to put a tracker on one of those bird-looking things, and I believe I have found its location, Momo would say towards the heroes, as many of them would jump out of their seats saying that's great. It could possibly be the location of where Katsuki Bakugo was. As All Might would put his hand up, saying that they shouldn't jump to conclusions here. Maybe they have a possible of 2 locations, maybe 3, 4, 5, and onward. We don't know yet, and we don't want to act on impulse. It's something that could lead us to all of us being killed. There's still hundreds of very powerful villains out there in this world. We gotta remember we're all not beasts that can just tank hits anymore. as many of them would nod their heads as they would start to slowly plan an attack to where Momo's tracker had just been telling them to go. As this would be happening, Izuku would end up being heard of the word from Momo herself, as they would end up just saying, "So, Izuku, are you in?" as Momo had gathered a group of people to go and rescue their classmate Bakugo. Izuku would sigh before just sort of laughing. It drives a tough bargain, huh? We've been told specifically by Aizawa not to mess with things that we shouldn't be involved in, and I know this is one thing that we shouldn't be involved in at all. You know doing something like this is gonna risk our lives immensely, right? All of his classmates that were in it would nod their heads, as Izuku would then sort of just laugh. Well, I guess it's settled then. I guess we really are gonna go out and save Bakugo. As all of this would be happening, Momo would end up saying that she had overheard them say the exact date and time that they were going to be attacking them. As they would end up, a week would pass, and Momo would gather them all up before giving them all disguises so that they wouldn't be seen or just know who they were by their teachers or villains, that is. So with that happening, Izuku and the rest of their class would end up sneaking out before just looking around to where Momo had created their extra tracker, as they would end up seeing the beeping on the map that Momo had shown them, as all of a sudden they would see All Might appear out of nowhere. They would be peering the corner before Izuku would tell them that it's not safe here and that they need to leave. However, they all couldn't move. They were desperate on saving Bakugo. And so with that, All Might jumping and smashing down just the side of the building, as the other heroes, like the wooded hero, would end up jumping in and grabbing many of the villains, just easily taking it out, as many of the police surrounding the building would start to celebrate, thinking that it had already been over. However, All Might would yell at them that this fight isn't hours from being over, and that they need to start getting prepared more, as gray goop would start to formulate out of nowhere, as All Might would look on towards it for just frowning. I knew we'd finally meet again, All for One. I knew you couldn't last long staying in the shadows. Oh, All Might, it's a pleasure to finally meet you again. Are you ready to finally die once and for all? I'm still guessing you haven't found a successor yet, All Might. Maybe I should just finish you off now and let this world be mine. But anyhow, so are you ready to fight, All Might? As All for One would lift up his hand as Goop would end up surrounding the wooded hero along with all of the other villains, as they would end up just going into the goop before being sent off to another warehouse, where they would end up being situated watching on the news as their eyes would all be fixated. There was their boss and leader now facing off against the best hero in history, All Might. They couldn't comprehend their leader having the possibility of being killed or possibly being locked away for the rest of his life. They just couldn't imagine it. As of this fight would end up beginning, Izuku would see an opportunity, as he would start to construct a plan with them. So, if both All Might and this All for One guy end up going out, maybe we could possibly try to rescue Bakugo. As Izuku's eyes would end up striking him, he would see the goop end up surrounding Bakugo, as Izuku would act instantly, along with Shoto Todoroki and the rest of the people there to save him, as they would construct their plan just almost instantly after having just told it without just playing it through in their minds, as Izuku would be sent propelling forward by Todoroki with his ice, as Izuku would launch in, grabbing Bakugo by the hand, lifting him up, yanking him out of the chair that he was trapped in. As Izuku now there, Bakugo would say, I knew you guys couldn't last too long without me. Izuku would glance towards Izuku before saying, oh, shut up, as they would end up just disappearing into the crowd of random people. As all this would end up happening, now disappearing, they would look on towards a Jumbotron where they would end up seeing the fight between All Might and All For One. All Might had just recently gave his quirk away to a young kid named Mirio, and so All Might didn't have much to worry about. He had a successor now, and so he could fight this with full force and not have to worry about being killed, besides the fate of everything that could possibly happen. He didn't want to have Mirio come in and save the day prematurely and possibly get himself killed as well. And so Izuku would end up watching this before disappearing into the shadows. Some of his classmates, mostly Kendo, would realize that Izuku was gone. She would look around before telling her classmates, as they would then say, "We haven't seen him. Do you think he got lost in the crowd?" Kendo would then just sigh before shaking her head. "I knew that I couldn't stay long without going into trouble," she would say, before looking onto the Jumbotron. Or the just Jumbotron that was now in front of them, and the massive screen that it was. It had been nicknamed the Jumbotron by everyone that had looked onto it, as the news had now been playing. "Don't do anything stupid, Izuku. I have my faith in you," Kendo would say, smiling on towards the massive TV for them, as the fight between All Might and All For One would end up beginning, as All Might would end up trading blow for blow with All For One, and All For One would do the same. However, all of this would end up being futile, as All Might's blows wouldn't do anything to All For One, as All For One would start to laugh on the weakening All Might. "You know, All Might, there's quite the difference between you and me. Quite the difference. You know, because you're going to die here today, and I'm going to live on as the ruler of this world forever. I already have many immortal quirks that are going to keep me alive for the rest of humanity. I'm going to see the extinction of humans, and yet I'll still be alive, living on. You don't understand how powerful I really am, All Might. Or should I say Toshinori?" All of a sudden, All Might would get another boost of strength, jumping on towards him. However, steam had already started to take over All Might, as he would end up going into Skelly Might form. However, right as this was happening, Izuku would jump in the way of All For One's punch, as the steam would end up blocking all sight of vision for All For One. Izuku would pull All Might out of the way, as he would end up just seeing All Might start to cough out blood. "You really saved me, kid, but you need to get out of here. It's not safe for you." Izuku would look on around a corner before saying, "Oh, I know, but if I don't do something now, hundreds of thousands of more people are going to die in the near future," Izuku would say, before leaving the injured All Might there, as he would end up turning the corner. "What the hell did you do to All Might?" Izuku would yell, as he had just been playing a complete act. "Oh, a kid. Well, why don't you run along, you little boy? You're not going to be able to deal with what I'm going to be doing in the next couple of minutes. I suggest running back to your family and spending the last couple of minutes with them." Izuku would rush off, just obeying what All For One had said. However, once he had turned the corner, Izuku would end up pulling his voice modulator out of his pocket. Putting it on, Izuku would flick it on, as if copying All Might's voice. "You know, All For One, we never did have many similarities. And you saying that I'm going to die here today? Why, that's the complete opposite. You're going to really die here today." "What? How the hell? I thought I completely destroyed your body with that punch." "Well, you've completely been mistaken. However, before I do end up ending your career as a villain, I do have a question to ask of you. Why? Why did you become a villain? Why did you become who you are?" As All For One would just start to laugh. "Oh, that's quite the simple question, All Might. I guess I'll let your final words happen, since you're not going to be living for much longer. Well, I became a villain because you've ran out of time. That's quite sad," as All Might's voice would end up glitching into Izuku's. You've ran out of time, all for one. That's quite sad. And since you did say it was a simple question for you, maybe I'll have to punish you even further, Izuku would say. However, none of the news copters surrounding them would pick up anything Izuku had even muttered towards All for One. All for One would try to take a step forward, trying to question the boy that he had just seen run off. However, he had been completely paralyzed in place, only being able to talk with Izuku. So, All for One, do you mind telling me what your real name is? All for One would just sort of laugh. Kid, why do you think I'd tell you what my name is? That'd be quite foolish of me. Wow, to think such an easy question would go unnoticed by you. And such a simple question being wrong deserves the harshest of punishments. As Izuku would say this, all of a sudden All for One would be able to move again, as he would jump off towards Izuku, gripping onto Izuku's head, trying to take Izuku's quirk. However, nothing were to happen. You know, All for One, you're quirkless now, you know. I was able to remove all of your quirks. It was a punishment, after all. And now the quirkless, frail old man that you really are is finally coming through. Why don't you say your last goodbyes before you turn into dust? As you are quite old, after all, those immortal quirks aren't there to keep you kicking anymore. So you're only going to be around for a couple more minutes until you just disintegrate. So why don't you go ahead and tell me your last words? Maybe give any sorries or apologies to those you've hurt and for all these years. All for One would then just laugh. You really think this is going to be the last of me? Trust me, this isn't going to be the last for me at all. All for One would say as his body would slowly start to turn into dust, completely deteriorizing, just completely turning into nothingness. As Izuku would see the dust blow away in the wind, as the news helicopters would just look on in shock. You've seen it here first, Oaks. The person that has possibly killed All Might, or even beaten him in battle, has just been defeated and possibly killed by a young boy. We still have no just information on it. We'll get you more information as soon as we possibly can, the news reporter would say before the camera would then cut out. Izuku would disappear into the shadows as police would end up rushing through the scene looking for any just victims that had possibly been trapped under all of the rubble, as All Might's body would end up being found as he would be helped up and being sent back to where the ER was, and Recovery Girl would be forced to be going over there to help him out and possibly give him an even speedier recovery, or even a recovery at that. So with all of that happening, Izuku would walk back to his house, deciding not to just see his friends that he had helped save Bakugo with one time, so he would go back to his house, just deciding to spend the night with his parents, which he had been doing the entire time. He just didn't want to bother with all of the commotion from any of his friends at UA. So with Izuku now at his parents' house, he would collapse onto his bed, completely avoiding both of his parents who had happened to take the night shift, which sucked for them since there was a heck of a lot of victims in the surrounding area and they were going to be very busy and possibly not get any sleep for the next couple of days. So with Izuku slumped in his bed, his alarm clock would start to blare. Clicking it, Izuku would get up out of his bed, groaning, as he would end up putting on his UA uniform before walking off to the UA school. As Izuku would sit down, all of a sudden he would see the red glowing eyes of Nezu standing above him with a ruler in hand. As the ruler would then slam down against Izuku's head, Izuku would grab it in pain. "Ah, come on, what the heck was that for?" Izuku would say, however he would look up to see Nezu standing above him, right on top of his desk. "You know that was very dangerous of you, Izuku. You could have gotten killed." Izuku would just sort of awkwardly laugh. "Yeah, but I decided to just give a sacrifice of my life for thousands of others, and it paid off since I'm still alive today, I guess. Still alive to tell the story of it, too." Nezu would just sigh at Izuku's antics before saying, You probably shouldn't be doing something so idiotic again. You know that, Izuku? Izuku would say, oh, I guess I shouldn't. As all of this would be happening, weeks would end up passing, as Izuku would be all over the media, as everyone had just heard about the young boy, and this had given Izuku a lot of unwanted attention, and even having to deal with other villains and acting in self-defense for villains trying to gain all the glory by defeating Izuku, by killing him, just getting a ton of street cred, or street credit that is, like in the villain underworld. So with all of this happening, Izuku would walk into school one day, as Aizawa would tell all of the students that they are going to be partaking in the Quirk testing exams, or the Quirk licensing exams. This is basically just so that they can use their Quirks just without any problems or hassles. So with that, Izuku would end up walking into school the next day, where they would end up traveling off to this random location where tons of other hero school testees and examinees would end up being there. As hours would pass, as Izuku and his class all worked together to get their hero licenses, as Izuku and his class would return back to UA, with Izuku showing it off to many of his Class 1B friends, who would just say, "Whoa, Izuku, that's really cool. I can't wait to get mine. However, it's gonna take a little while, it is." Izuku would just sort of laugh and say, "Yeah, maybe you guys will even be moved up into Class 1A next year. Or if you perform well in some of the other events that Class 1A versus Class 1B, maybe you'll even be moved up too," Izuku would say, as many of them would just nod their heads in agreement, as Izuku would end up just walking back into class, as he would end up just seeing a letter on his desk. He would pick it up, opening it, as he would end up seeing it assigned. "You know, Izuku, we've been in the same class for quite a while, and I've had these feelings for quite a while too, ever since we talked on the first day of UA. So, why don't you meet me at the entrance of UA at around 6 p.m. tonight?" Izuku would be confused at that, but would just say, "Okay, to hell with it. There's no harm in going. I mean, I'd be missing out on quite the opportunity if I were to not go." So Izuku would end up just walking on to the entrance of UA, where he would end up seeing the same orange-haired girl that had been in his classes for almost a year now. "You know, Izuku, these feelings have been building up for you for quite a while. So I finally decided to tell you. You wanna maybe go out for dinner sometime?" Izuku would just shrug before saying, "Alright, sure. I've had some strange feelings for you too, I guess. So I might as well make this sort of a dating thing, I guess. It's quite strange. I've never had a girlfriend before. This will be quite interesting," Izuku would say before walking off, as he would end up walking back to his house, as Inko would end up seeing Izuku there. "You know, Izuku, I forgot to tell you that we're having Isa's parents over, so why don't you help me start making dinner?" Izuku would nod his head, and for while he was preparing dinner with his mother, he would tell Inko about how he had recently just gotten a date with some girl that had been in his class for quite a while. Inko would screech in excitement before asking Izuku all different sorts of questions about what's her name and all this and that about her, as Izuku would just sort of sigh. "I don't really wish to talk about it right now, Mom. I really don't want to," Izuku would say, as she would just sort of nod. "Well, alright then." As Lisa and her parents would end up arriving, as Izuku would end up being told to take Lisa up to his room, while the parents went and talked over a glass of wine and a beverage. So as Izuku would take Lisa up there, Izuku would end up talking about what he had achieved over the past couple of hours. "Well, that's quite interesting, Izuku. I'm surprised you actually managed to get a date, being with your personality." Izuku would glance towards Lisa, just in a striking glance, as if saying, "Oh, really now?" As she would then just sort of awkwardly laugh. "I'm surprised I haven't been able to find anyone yet. Maybe you'll be able to set me up with someone in your in your class. As Izuku would say, maybe I could. With that, Izuku would end up walking out, as he would end up looking through his phone before walking back into his room. What about this kid? Izuku would say, as Lisa would look on towards Shinso that Izuku had been on his phone. What the hell, I'll give it a try, I guess. Izuku would just shrug his shoulders, saying, okay, I guess that works. As he would end up calling Kendo's number, saying that they could possibly do a double date with one of his best friends that he's known before high school, and possibly Shinso if he's up to it. Kendo would say, what the hell, I guess so. We'll see what happens, maybe it'll be quite interesting. And so Izuku would end up asking Shinso if he wishes to go on a date with someone, as Izuku would show him a picture, as Shinso would have pretty much the same response as Kendo. What the hell, be no harm in trying, I guess. As that would end up happening, and the night would end up commencing, with them going out to a fancy restaurant, with Izuku and Kendo taking their time talking to each other, as Shinso and Lisa would end up getting to know each other quite as well. And at the end of the night, it would end with Shinso and Lisa kissing each other, with both Kendo and Izuku just looking awkwardly at them, just saying, hey, I guess it worked out in the end. It moved quite quickly for them. As a couple months would end up passing, Izuku and Kendo, and along with Shinso and Lisa's relationship, would move quite along. However, that's besides the point. Izuku would be walking in to school one day, finding out that it was the work-study time period. So Izuku had decided to internship or just work-study with Aizawa once again. So after a couple weeks, Aizawa would end up telling Izuku how he's going to take him on to a bust of something called Shei Hasuke, a sort of crime organization in the underground. So with that, Izuku would be nodding his head. However, Aizawa would tell him that he's going out with Mirio, since he's going to be higher up. I've asked Night-Eye to have Mirio take you out just to show you some of the ropes of being an even more hero in that day, since I'm not really the day sort of hero. Izuku would nod his head, as we now see Mirio and Izuku walking along a street. However, a young white-haired girl would end up bumping into Izuku, as Izuku would look on down towards her, as Izuku would look up to see a striking person now standing before the plague doctor-looking person, or Izuku's day clothes now standing on him. Izuku had decided to get a day hero costume along with a night hero costume. The day hero costume resembled something of a plague doctor, but however it was a lot lighter, and it only had a bird mask, a kind of bird mask that looked close to Overhaul's. As Overhaul would see Izuku now looking down at Yuri, he would end up seeing the resemblance with him. Izuku, however, would immediately recognize who Overhaul was, as Overhaul would say, sorry that she bothered you. Come on, Al, we best be going. Izuku would look on towards Overhaul before asking him a question, putting his hand on his shoulder, as Overhaul would turn around, just looking at disgust, glaring down towards Izuku's hand. Do you mind telling me what that little girl's name is? Izuku would say. You don't need to know that, Overhaul would bark back, as Izuku would then smile. You know, Overhaul, you just played right into my hand, as Izuku would all of a sudden see Overhaul's hands completely just explode off of him, completely being just disappearing, as Overhaul would look on completely down in shock at his now missing hands. What the hell did you do? I made things a hell of a lot easier for us heroes, as Izuku would grab Overhaul's head before kneeing him right in the skull, calling Night-Eye, who would then rush down, picking up Eri, along with the police, who would then get the unconscious Overhaul out of there. As a couple of months would end up passing, as the festival, or the UA festival, would end up beginning, with all of the music, ceremonies, plays, and all of that would end up passing as well. As finally, the Class 1A versus Class 1B main event would finally be taking place. It was seriously called the Class 1B versus Class 1A fight, and so it was going to be teams of 4 pitted against each other, and it's in sort of a random area. So these teams of 4 are going to have to face each other and capture all 4 to end up moving on to the next round. Izuku's team would end up being Shinso, Kendo, Izuku, and Bakugo. The team was quite stacked, and many of the people on Class 1A and Class 1B knew this quite well. And so when the Class 1A versus Class 1B fighting would commence, it really wasn't fair. The match would be over in just a short 15 minutes, which most of that time was spent with the Class 1A team trying to find Class 1B. So with that over with, many of the other teams would try to follow suit with how dominant the Class 1A team had been. However, many of them couldn't replicate their same success, as Class 1A would end up ending in a draw and even losing a match before winning the other last matches. So it appears that Class 1B had severely weakened without their 2 strongest people on it being Kendo and Izuku. Kendo, Izuku, and Bakugo would all end up becoming the new Big 3 at UA, before they would end up graduating from the UA Hero School, where Izuku would end up going on to becoming a hero much like Aizawa, even mastering Aizawa's scarf, as Shinso would end up doing the same. As many of them would even work together during nights where they would be hunting out huge villains that could possibly pose a threat if only one of them had decided to go. However, Kendo had decided to take another route after graduating from hero school. She had become sort of a model-type hero, kind of like how Midnight and Mount Lady had become, but they didn't really focus on it. Her hero agency just kind of made her do it. However, Izuku had decided just to make his own hero agency, which Kendo would end up joining in the future. Kendo would end up becoming a top 5 pro hero after being behind just Bakugo, Todoroki, and a couple of other people that had just graduated from other hero schools, not from UA. Izuku would take his time as a hero, spending nights throughout alleyways, going throughout the entire city, as no one knew who Izuku was. He had completely been an unranked hero before becoming sort of like a 212th ranked hero, which meant nobody knew who he was. And so with that, Izuku, with no one knowing what he was or conspiracizing on what Izuku's quirk happened to be, Izuku would go around easily just defeating all of the villains in his path, as many of them would even mistake Izuku for villains of their villains. So with them not really knowing Izuku was a hero, and Izuku just asking random questions to put them off guard, Izuku would become quite the successful hero, saving many people, as Izuku would become quite successful, like I just said. As years would end up passing, as Kendo and Izuku would end up getting married and having a couple of kids, which they would end up growing up to be in the same Class 1A that Izuku had got himself into, along with Lisa and Shinso's kids as well. However, Aizawa wasn't their teacher no longer. He had decided to go off and just do his own things after retiring from the hero business, and so the new UA teacher had just happened to be Izuku Midoriya. However, many of them didn't know who Izuku was behind the mask, so Izuku would come in wearing his entire hero costume with the scarf in hand as well, however, just without the Plague Doctor mask that kept his identity a secret. And so Izuku, without that, many of the students there would have no clue who Izuku happened to be, as Izuku would then just sort of laugh. Well, I'm kind of a ranked hero, a 212th ranked hero, that is. How could you be our Class 1A hero teacher? You're not even in the top 100. Well, let's just say I could beat the number one hero if I really wanted to, Lemillion. I could actually beat him if I wanted to, that is. But I have no points in beating him. What? There's no way a 212th ranked hero could beat Lemillion. Izuku would just sort of laugh. Have you guys ever heard of All Might? Izuku would ask questioningly. Before some of them would say, isn't he the prior number one hero before Endeavor and then Lemillion? Izuku would just sigh before nodding his head. Yup, and I managed to beat him. You could say he was almost just as powerful as Lemillion. And so I could beat Lemillion if I truly wanted to, but I have no point in that. As many of you, after a couple of months spending time with me, as I'm your teacher after all, going to be spending a lot of time here in the classroom with me, you'll understand why I'm not ranked, as I don't bother to become such a ranked and high notable hero that everyone wishes to become. You all will know the reasons why shortly in a couple of months, like I had just said. But anyway, why don't we go ahead and start with our first test. And then if anyone doesn't try their absolute hardest, or if you don't have enough potential, or if you happen to get last place, you'll be expelled from the hero program in UA forever, and you'll never be able to try out for it again, Izuku would say, smiling on. As months would end up passing, and as Izuku would end up hearing that Lemillion was in the hospital. However, no one except Izuku and a few others had known that. Izuku, All Might told me what you did for him. Izuku would look on at the dying Lemillion now. He had contracted a rare disease that he just couldn't get rid of. He had just turned the age of 40, and it was in sort of a prime for him. He was stopping more villains than ever. However, all of that came to a striking halt, as Izuku would end up seeing the dying face of Lemillion before he would end up plucking one of his hairs and giving it to Izuku, as he would hand a jar to Izuku, putting it in it before tightly putting the cap on. Go give this to someone you deem worthy, he would say, as Izuku would end up knowing the perfect person. It happened to be one of his kids, which actually happened to be Quirkless, as Izuku would end up walking up to him and explaining what he had discovered, as Izuku had deemed his kid worthy, as he had seen the potential he could have had if he had a Quirk. His sheer desire and thirst to become a hero and save as many people as possible was truly admirable and honorable. So Izuku decided to make his young kid's dream come true. He had managed to make it into UA. However, he wasn't in the hero course at all. However, Izuku hoped that this would propel his son into this, as it would. As months would pass of hard training, his son would finally be able to use a ton% of One for All. And so son would travel up and through the sports festival, get first, and get into Class 1A. As years would pass, as his son would then end up becoming the number one hero with the help of his new Quirks, One for All. And that is where this what if ends. Izuku has a perfect family. He has quite moments of success, however, pretty much no one who he was, only knowing him as the husband of Izuku Kendo. As Izuku, however, was much more than that, being the Plague Doctor, of course. As that being his hero name, it struck fear in hearts of people, as anyone who saw him would end up being locked away. However, the word his hero name spread quickly. They might not know what he looked like, but they sure as hell knew if someone were to say the Plague Doctor was near, that they needed to scatter as quickly as they could. And so with Izuku now just having his life fulfilled, he had children, he had just the brightest thing in his life, and so Izuku would end up having a happy life, retiring from hero work after working alongside the number one hero, being his son, for a couple of missions before he would end up retiring. And that is when he would truly reveal how many crimes he had stopped before he had retired, where he had kept a record but told the police to keep it a secret. And so when he would retire, he would release all of the records to the media and all of that, where it would end up exploding. He had been able to capture twice as many villains as the number two hero, Lord Explosion Murder, as Izuku, not having to deal with all the paparazzi and media, could go around saving as many people and destroying as many villains as he wanted to. And so Izuku would end up just becoming sort of famous after releasing these. However, Izuku couldn't care less, ending up moving his now retired wife and up to just a mountaintop cottage or just a lodge where they would end up spending the rest of their life together, where their grandkids would end up coming to visit and all sorts of that, or they would end up spending time up in their lakeside mountaintop house. And that, once again, is where this what if ends. Izuku's life ends in perfect harmony for him. He has everything he had ever wanted, and now his life is truly fulfilled. And that is where this what if ends. Once again, I thank you all for watching. Once again, if you've made it this far all in one sitting, congratulations. I can't believe you've been able to sit through around 3 hours or so of me talking about Izuku. So anyways, I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.